Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hemlock podcast. It's been a while. Hope you're well. We have a spicy interview for you today. Enjoy. Okay, so let's get into it. We have an interview today with teacher, ex-teacher, Jim McMurtry, who is from our very own, he was teaching in Abbotsford, he's from Surrey, but in our very own town of Abbotsford, he was fired from his teaching position at a local school for speaking up against some of the woke nonsense we have going on in our allegedly conservative little town here. So he was fired for speaking out against woke stuff. And so we have a nice long conversation with him where we unpack a lot of what happened to him and a host of other issues. I had a really, really good time talking with him. We got through a lot. Rogue really wanted to be a part of the intro at first. That's what she told me. And now she seems to want to go. So Rogue, you good? You just going to lie down there? Yeah? Okay. The beautiful people can't even see you when you're down there. Okay. She did specifically request that you go leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And she said, Dad, people are going to think that you're not above using your dog for emotional blackmail to get good reviews, but I don't want them to think that because I'm asking for this for myself. Because when people do the good reviews, it helps to feed me. So her words. Not mine. We got review bombed very early on by leftists who don't like truth. And so our reviews on Apple Podcasts are not great, even though the podcasts clearly are excellent, high value, of the utmost quality. So please go leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whatever service, Spotify, whatever you're using. That helps us out a lot. Okay, Rogue, I think your work here is done. Good job. Good job. Give me a kiss. Yes, good girl. Thank you. Couple more things. It's been a while since I've done a podcast. I have a 9-week-old daughter now, which I'm very, very excited about. It's one of the reasons I've been a little absent is I've just been working on other projects, making money in preparation for having my first child. And so, but it's something I want to get back into. I've been doing a lot more writing. So if you're not subscribed, I have a Substack, which will be linked in the whatever platform it'll be somewhere. But I've been doing that, or hemlockpodcast.com. You can subscribe to the mailing list as well. All the writing will be there as well. So with no further ado, let's get into the conversation with Jim McMurtry. Like I said, he was fired from his position for speaking out against some woke stuff, specifically around Indigenous issues, and it's further become about more things than just that. But we have a really, really good conversation. Part of the reason I wanted to do this topic specifically is now that I'm a father, I have a little girl who's going to be entering the school system, perhaps in a few years. I mean, we're most likely going to homeschool, but that doesn't mean everybody can, right? If we're able to homeschool, and I hope we are, that's great. But not everybody has that choice. And so when they see things like what happened with Mr. McMurtry in a local school district, that makes you want to stand up and fight. Because children are being harmed, I think, in this whole situation. And so there's some stuff going on that I don't want my little girl exposed to. And I know other parents don't want their little boys and girls exposed to either. And so I think we need to be aware of it. And I think there's a lot going on in Abbotsford that is not only reflective of a lot of what's going on in other school districts across Canada and across the States, but it's stuff that parents need to be aware of, right? There's a lot of stuff going on with your kids in their school districts that parents are simply not being informed of, and I think would be horrified in many cases to be made aware of. So this is an important one. Share it as much as you can. There's a lot of stuff in here that I think parents need to hear, and that's one of the reasons I'm passionate about it recently, is because now a father myself, this is stuff that I don't want my little girl exposed to. So I hope to do a little more on this topic because it's close to home. It happened here in my hometown of Abbotsford, which is, like I said, an allegedly conservative town. We're supposed to be the Bible Belt of the Fraser Valley here, and we have teachers getting fired for speaking out against woke nonsense, which I understand that at a very personal level. So with no further ado, I said that a while ago, and then I went on with further ado. Let's get into the conversation. Jim McMurtry, everybody, enjoy. Jim, thank you so much. Can I call you Jim, Mr. McMurtry? You're a teacher, so Mr. McMurtry is probably more appropriate. But what can I call you?
Jim.
Jim's good? Perfect. Jim, nice to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start by, let's hear your story. So you were working at Mowat High School?
Yeah.
Here in the Abbotsford School District. How long have you worked there?
I worked there technically I worked there for longer than I was there physically. But I was really there over 2 years.
2 years. Got it. Have you been in the Abbotsford School District long?
No, I hadn't been. I was there. So my story, I was a long time teacher and principal and community college instructor, did various things. But mostly a teacher in Surrey. And then my wife took ill, so I thought it'd be a good idea to move out into the valley and do what a lot of older people do. And that is, buy something maybe a little less expensive. Not that it really is any less expensive in Abbotsford.
Yeah, that's real.
And I am always attracted to the countryside. I think Abbotsford's a beautiful spot and all the lakes nearby. And so I was really excited. But I right away, I expected to some extent about being in a Bible Belt that I had to be careful not to in any way violate anybody's religious, sensibilities. But that wasn't a problem. The religious people were lovely and graceful with me. The problem was on the other side, political spectrum. The left, radical, communist, woke types, social justice. I know a lot of them are good people, but but there's an intolerance that's very dangerous there. So right away, I got a sense there was a lot of things I couldn't teach, and it's hard because that's my job. Is to develop. The root sense of education means to develop and to lead out. And yet what it seems right, and of course this is right across the Western world, particularly North America, there's an awful lot of indoctrination and things like critical race theory and gender ideology and pronouns and pride, memorizing pride flag, colors, censoring books that we used to love as children, I used to love as children, and replacing them with drivel, but it has, the right people, which means people that don't look like me.
Right.
And so it's all kind of strange for me that I met a woke storm in Abbotsford. I thought it'd be more likely to do that going toward the city and not further away from the big city of Vancouver.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned we have the reputation of being conservative Abbotsford or the Bible Belt of the Fraser Valley, like you said, right? And that, I think, is probably the perception of a lot of parents still in Abbotsford, that we still teach like that. That's still the ethos in our school districts, and that hasn't been your experience, would you say? So where do you think that comes from in the Abbotsford School District?
Yeah, well, you've asked me some great questions, and I'm really appreciative of you for having me on today. I'm going to get right to the meat of my story. Some people would know about me, and shockingly, so many don't. And the most ridiculous thing, and I'm not trying to knock the good people of Abbotsford, but there's only one media source that I'm aware of that a lot of people get news from. That's the Abbey News, and the Abbey News for almost 4 years has stayed away from my story. So I don't understand that at all. So I think it's sad that I think in many cases people know more about my story outside of Abbotsford than inside of Abbotsford. So maybe being with you today is going to help change things a little bit. But the meat of my story is that what's happened to me is incredibly anti-Christian, because and I'm not saying that I came into the school system as someone wearing my religion as a mantle. I didn't. I came into the school system to have kids think and come to their own conclusions. So one day, May 31st, 2021, the last day I taught, and maybe in my whole life, because I haven't taught since, and I don't think there's any chance of me getting work ever again, combination of my age and the fact that I've got this big black mark on me. There was a girl in my classroom that said that the priests and nuns, sorry, she didn't say nuns, the priests at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, murdered and tortured and did all sorts of terrible things and secretly buried 215 children. And this is a day that the whole school district, and I know you said you've got a young child or children that are going to be going into the school system. It's shocking. It's not what you imagine. Even 5 years ago, school systems right across as said, North America in particular, have really changed. And there's an awful, starting with, in the morning, there's a land acknowledgement, and then you look around and there's all these things that one has to show fealty to. One has to give out their pronoun, and one has, it's almost like it's a new religion with a new ritual. And one has to be very careful. Most teachers stay away from the staff room now, particularly at lunchtime, because you just can't say anything because someone's going to find it. Oh, that's offensive.
Really?
And so what happened to me is when the kids said that, all I said was, it was a grade 12 calculus class, but the school district really wanted to milk the whole because they're virtue signalers. The Abbotsford School District, just for whatever reason right now, is much more interested in indoctrinating children than in educating them. So the day the news broke of that horrible, at the time it was certainly horrible sounding, it would be the biggest mass murder of children, or the biggest mass murder in Canadian history. So it was something that people were upset by. But they had everyone at school wearing orange, and some even had face paint, and they were just, some kids looked like they were going to, jump out the window or, tear someone apart. It's like an Orwellian 2 minute of hate. So what I tried to do in the classroom, when the principal said everybody has to stop what they're doing, and for me it was teaching calculus 12, stop what we're doing, we had to just talk about it. And I just said one thing that got me in trouble and had me walked out of school in front of my students. And that was that the kids and I didn't even say, I tell you exactly what I said. And that was that my understanding was that students who died tragically at Indian residential schools in our past did so from disease, particularly tuberculosis. That's it. That's taboo. That's heresy. I think if there was a stake outside the school, they would have had me tied and burned there. And all he was saying, which of course is historically true. And I would love to have an argument with someone who tells me I'm wrong on that. I have a PhD. I'm an older person who's read about Canadian history my whole life. I've got many publications, and I'm part of a research group on this very subject called the Indian Residential School Research Group. And the idea that I don't know what I'm talking about is absolutely absurd. But my employer, the Abbotsford School District, doesn't have a clue, in my view, about history. And that's okay, because everybody has different areas of expertise. But the fact that they wanted to punish me and take away my job. So it took me a couple of years to try and find ways to defend myself, and it didn't work. And I was officially fired almost 2 months ago.
Got you. And I think and I'm not sure how much of this is them kind of just trying to save face, but some of the documents you posted on Twitter were saying they were using you're talking to Rebel News, I believe, as like the official reason to actually let you go. But you're saying this started much sooner, and it was based on something as simple as going and not saying that there wasn't great evil done in residential schools, like that's well known as well, but you just saying most of them died from disease, which is historically accurate, right? Saying something as innocuous as that started this process in which you were railroaded, and then you use kind of Rebel News and the media to draw attention to it, and then they use that as an excuse to fire you. Is that like a fair retelling?
But they keep changing their story because they're caught in a lie. But they have all the power as David and Goliath, and they can fire me, but I'm still here, and I have a mechanism, my union standing with me. And I hope to one day go to.
That's good to hear.
Go to court. Now, who knows what's going to happen? And most judges and arbitrators and others that are appointed these days, their institutions have been taken over by this new religion as well. So I could go to arbitration and go to court and meet someone who believes that the world's flat, because these people are. They just, I just think they've turned everything upside down. You can't say boys and girls anymore because other people are saying that's not true, and they're pushing all sorts of really bizarre and perverse sexual stuff onto kids who are as young as 5 or 6, and asking them to identify all the time, not
Wow.
just their sexuality, but but if they considered that maybe they're in the wrong body. The gender dysmorphia is something, the dysphoria is really quite an interesting thing, because it's
Mhm.
almost every class that I was teaching in Abbotsford and in Surrey. And again, only in the last 5 years, there's a boy changing into a girl or a girl changing into a boy. An Abbotsford mother contacted me. I've heard from lots of people across Canada since I went public. And she said to me that her daughter was at a school in Abbotsford, and they took her out and they moved to Cholak. And one of the reasons is 4 of her girlfriends, and this is a middle school child, were turning to male. 4.
Wow.
And so it's just is how you get ahead in the system is like in Russia. I guess you say how wonderful the war is, or in Iran you say how lovely Islam is, or whatever part of the world we're
Right.
in. We always, you go along with the governing idea, and it's a good thing. So there's all sorts of teachers and principals that want to run absolutely everything that the senior management comes up with up the flagpole, even if it's insane. They're getting rid of, and I was told not to have essays, not to have tests with senior students, senior history students and English students. I was told, I'm encouraged to do equity marking, where you give marks based, if any marking at all. It's just, just everybody's to get through, and everybody is to really, more than anything else, is to become a good social justice warrior. So why I got fired was because of that. That was really the reason, because they investigated me and they were going to terminate me on that. But then they invested me after that, long after I'd left the school, and I was sitting at home for going to the media. So that, Patrick, is going to the media. I can understand an employer doesn't like, but there is something called whistleblowing, and there's something
Mm-hmm.
rotten happening in a school, I feel. But I didn't go right to the media at first. I
Right.
went to my trustees in Abbotsford, and 3 of
Mm-hmm.
them were elected because they care about parents. Well, they're part of the group
That's right.
that
Yeah.
fired me. So I guess they don't. They were sympathetic to me, but it came down to they completely were bullied by the senior management in the district, because I think that they really did have some sympathy for me. But they recognize there's a lot of indoctrination happening.
Mm. Yeah, I've reached out to a few of the trustees, actually. Not much of a response yet. I have a connection to a couple of them. And yeah, you're not surprised to hear that. Yeah, and there hasn't been much of a response, because I'd love to hear the whole, like, their side of the story, obviously. But as a concerned citizen, like, and I mentioned, I have an 8-week-old daughter. That's going to be in the school system in a few years. Well, maybe we're most likely looking at homeschooling at this point. But that's something that I think concerns the parents of Abbotsford deeply, is when we're electing people to the Board of Education, or electing trustees based on Parents First. I think was one of the platforms, at least one of them specifically, called it Parent First, right? And so when that's happening, and it's we're not seeing the fruits of that, right? We're seeing teachers who, and I think from what I've seen of you don't identify as like conservative or anything like that. I think you said you lean liberal, and you still were railroaded this way. Is that accurate, or where do you lie yourself?
I'm a free-thinking liberal, which means
Right.
I'm a conservative today. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm,
Exactly.
I'm the same
Exactly.
person that I was 50 years ago. I
Right.
even ran for the federal Liberals, what was it, in 2006. So I'm
Really.
naturally a liberal because I'm open-minded, and I think it's a good place for a teacher to be. Sort of the middle of the political
Mm-hmm.
spectrum, open to lots of things, but sensitive to minority groups and people
Sure.
and who are less fortunate than I am. And so I just kind of thought that, yeah, I'm kind of a run-of-the-mill type. There's nothing special about me. But in recent
Yeah.
years, boy, have I realized that I've been completely abandoned by the Liberal Party. And
Yeah.
and the Conservative Party, I'm not so sure of, but it's certainly a lot better place. But I mean, the conservative people are the ones that are defending all the things that matter to me as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
They want debate in schools. They want traditional educational values. They want competition and merit and honesty and fairness and standards and consequences. Anyhow, all these values which we just assumed were part of mainstream Canada. You take away
Mm-hmm.
conservative people, there's going to be nothing left. there'd be no one there to defend it. So thank goodness that we still have, and this is why I thought I was going to be better off in Abbotsford. That all these people who share academic values, traditional Canadian ideals, people who love their country, not just now, but back in time, who aren't ashamed to say, yes, Sir John Macdonald built the country, who won't, and even with Indian residential schools, I don't mean to, I'm away from the narrative more than I would be in the classroom with you. But I'd certainly like parents here. I don't believe in anything that the government says anymore, because I've realized, not just living through COVID, but I've just experienced so many things lately when I just think that, really there's no intention whatsoever to be truthful. And with Indian residential schools, I could say a couple of things. Fewer than most of their history, fewer than a third of all kids, Indigenous kids, went to those schools. Most of them that went there came from families that either abandoned them or didn't have the necessities to properly take care of them. Some were orphans. Almost all of them came with one disease or another. So the schools were a bit of a refuge for in lots of ways. Also, they were, it wasn't possible to have day schools or put kids into regular Canadian schools if they lived in the middle of, Northern Canada or Western Canada, in the middle of nowhere. So it was intention was to provide them with an education. And I've recently put out, and you might have seen on Twitter, I put out all sorts of pictures of hockey teams that went to Europe, of baseball teams, of soccer teams, of plays and reunions and grad events, and just happy kids and loving adults talking about how they come and kiss us goodnight and say they loved us, the teachers, how the teachers, many of them were even Aboriginal. People are saying, oh, they ripped them from their parents. There were waiting lists at some of these residential schools. They wanted to build more of them. Wow. So yeah, there are bad things that happen in some of the schools, and there's some teachers who took advantage of the children. But a lot of the sexual stuff was from older students and from Aboriginal staff. But there's only been 4 people in the history of Indian residential schools charged. So that suggests that the police are good people. The police would go after many more people, would have gone after, if they had, heard. But the residential schools is just a recent thing. It's just one of these things that everybody's going, it's sort of like COVID. It's the same, there's an hysteria. And then after a while, people start going, oh, well, do I even need the vaccination? Because I'm not sure it's a good thing, because I'm reading reports of people it's hurting. So it's this whole idea, it's just completely changing. The idea that the priests and nuns are by nature murderers, and they would murder 215 kids just in one school. I think that's, it's bad for one's reputation, in a humorous sense, but it's just such it's called false witness. It's the 9th commandment. You don't do that. You can't charge, particularly dead people who can't defend themselves. They're not here to do that. Right. And many of them came from Europe, and they gave their whole life up to helping these kids. They didn't make much money. And what they had made, in many cases, it went completely to the kids. And they did that. And they created things. They created the first hospitals and schools in Canada and charities. The influence of the Jesuits and the Ursulines, and then more recently in residential schools in Kamloops, the Oblates and the Sisters St. Anne. To say that they were murderers is just absurd. So what gets me really upset is so many people in Abbotsford and elsewhere. Not only do they not know about me, because Abbotsford News is caught in a lie as well, because they know everything they printed about that story in Kamloops is a complete lie. And so they're just wanting to disappear. But I can't disappear because I lost my livelihood. So I have to stand up for myself. And I want kids to know the truth about history. I think, Patrick, I'm a history teacher more than anything else in recent years. If I were to say to you, okay, you're a student of mine, and here's what happened in Canada's past, I think you'd want to know what happened. You wouldn't want me to make something up. I think you'd be pretty upset with me if I was saying, well, Canada became a country in 76 when it was 1867. You'd want me to get it right. And
as much as I wish we were the States at some time.
And but it's just amazing. I can say lots of things to kids. One thing I say to kids is, and I say lots of silly things. I'm usually the worst behaved person in the classroom. One thing I'll say to kids, if I'm young for the day, young, little kids, I'm doing math, and I'll say, oh, I'm trying to make the little things in life count. And I'll say, you know what, boys and girls, um, I'm the best math teacher or best whatever teacher in the world. And the kids don't believe me. Even in grade 1, they don't believe me. They go, no, you're not, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting that everybody who's older in the school system, kids, teachers, and then parents, they're accepting all this. They're not going, oh, what do you mean? Oh, well, of course. Well, there must have been all these murders at one school and torturing kids, been put in incinerators and hanged and impregnated and all these things. They must be true. Why is it that Canadians all of a sudden just lost all their critical faculties and go, well, if I believe something, Patrick, if you want to sell me something, I don't know, a used car or something, I would ask you a lot of questions. I'd want to, like this idea that I didn't even ask a question. I didn't even go against the narrative at the time. And again, I haven't taught since that day. And they just brutalized me.
Wow.
They didn't want me to, they walked me out, and I said I wasn't going to go out easily for them unless they let me talk to the principal. And the principal, there's a Robert Bateman secretary, that's where I went to. After having a hard time at Mowat, I became a substitute teacher, and this is it that really finished me off. And the principal, he was nice to me. He said, oh, in the base of what you're saying to me, you said it sounded fine, but they didn't know you. And I went, of course they don't know me. I was a substitute teacher that day. I was wearing a mask because it was COVID. And I'm a regular size, white older male. Like I'm the enemy. I've the social justice type. But why are you punishing me? I'm educated. I probably know more about what happened in residential schools, and what happened in Kamloops because I was reading about it the weekend before when it first came out. So I was really prepared. But it just nobody wanted to hear from me. Nobody wants to still in the school system question this. Teachers are too afraid, or they're just going to go, I'm just going to, I don't, blah, blah, nah, 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 they just don't want to know because they know it's not a good thing. And maybe that's how you function in a totalitarian society. You just, like Winston Smith, you realize that you accept in the end that Big Brother's controlling everything, controlling your mind. But we're not there yet. We're not fully totalitarian society. So why shouldn't I be allowed to have my students to consider established truth, which is that the kids died from disease?
Yeah, I have a theory about it, so maybe I'll field that to you and see what you think. I wrote a piece actually recently that's on my website called "The Missing Piece." I think the tagline was "Searching for Absolution in a Secularized Society," and I think, to me, I think it's a spiritual problem, where there seems to be, we call it white guilt in politics, right? But there seems to be this level of guilt for how, like, we live in the prosperous West, right? We're very wealthy if you look at from a global perspective. We're very wealthy, right? And so I think there's like an inherent level of guilt that comes with that, like being prosperous and wanting to do something about it. And what we used to do about it in a more Christian society is we would go to confession, or we would have a conversation with Jesus and go like, look, I'm gonna do the best I can to help make this world a better place. I'm gonna donate to charities, and I'm gonna and Father, forgive me, I don't know what I'm doing. And that's the impulse we had. And we had a spiritual method of finding absolution for that. And as we've secularized, we've completely just thrown those tools out the window, right? And so I think collectively as a society, we don't know what to do with that guilt we feel. We're rich and we feel bad about it. And we don't know where to go with that. And so we do these struggle sessions, right? We self-flagellate all the time. And the way that manifests is like really toxic, because it has to do with like, okay, we found supposedly 215 bodies at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And what's the worst possible take we can have on that? Because that must have been, all these religious people must have been terrible and abusive. And some of them were, like we've talked about. History is complicated, right? And that's why it's so toxic to go, oh, they were all evil, and residential schools were like a terrible thing. I was reading a story about a young Indigenous man who like thanked residential schools for changing his life, because I think he was sent 300 kilometers away to the nearest residential school, got an education, ended up in like a really high paying job, and he's like, without this residential school, it never would have happened to me, right? So it's like, for as much tragedy and abuse that there was in some of these schools, because that's true, there's the opposite side of the spectrum, and who's telling those stories, right? Not to mention at the Kamloops school specifically, like I don't think they've never actually found those bodies. Like there's a great National Post article on this that talks about they were using this ground penetrating radar and didn't find a single thing. They never actually did any. They didn't exhume anything. And that story was never covered. We never found these bodies. Did you see those headlines? Like they weren't anywhere. And so if the movement is truth and reconciliation, there is no reconciliation without truth. And so if we're lying about it, how are we actually, like, is this supposed to help Canadians kind of sew ourselves back together? Is this supposed to help relations in Canada? I don't think that's going to work. What I want to ask you is maybe two questions. So first I'll ask is, do you think my theory is right about the absolution thing? And number two, why do you think they push that kind of stuff? Is that like a divide and conquer thing, or like why does media and government, which you talk about, are very untrustworthy these days? Why do they push this kind of stuff so hard, and then they don't push the actual truth when that comes out? So number one, do you think my absolution theory? How am I doing on that?
Yeah, some people have that. They're racked by guilt for all sorts of things. I think many of us really do, as you said beautifully, that we're privileged relative to most of the world, and we want to be good. But the problem is the phenomenon of the virtue signaler, which is a politician or institutional leader, as we have, or leaders in Abbotsford, who are using this not to help the people. They're not digging out of their own pocket. They talk in Abbotsford all the time about equity, diversity, inclusion, all that sort of stuff. Well, the highest paid people in the district aren't digging into their pockets, or not cutting their salary and giving more to people without money, people that are homeless in Abbotsford. None of that's happening. They're just figuring out ways to pay themselves more every year, because they're the ones that make decisions on the money that the government gives them from taxpayers. So I think the whole thing is a fraud. I think, bad things happen in residential schools, but I think is grossly exaggerated. When you use the word absolution, so I'll come back to that point. I get that, and I'm certainly that way. If I meet a kid in the classroom who's a hard left kid, and it's not because of race or religion or whatever, that's the outside. I'm looking at the kid, but I find out that the kid has no mother at home, or no father, and has no money, or whatever. It's sad, or in that kid's life. Then it pulls on my heart. That's what teachers do. Teachers are, that I've spent my life around teachers. They're good people. We're kind of almost ridiculously bleeding heart. So I get it. Why we want to be that way. But it's not because of race. It's not because of being Indigenous or Black or Muslim or whatever that one is lacking in privilege. There are a lot of Indigenous, Black, and Muslim, or whatever group one wants to focus on, who are incredibly privileged and successful and confident and talented, and don't need the teacher's help. And I had white students in my school at WJ Mowat. A number of them came from a trailer park in social housing that wasn't far from the school, right across the street. So this idea that we can judge people, as we judge books from their cover, is coming absurd. But just on the second part of your question is interesting to me as well. But I just want to say one last thing on that. Yes, I think the Christians do a good job of educating. I really do believe that. And that's why we have the schools that we do. They're all in universities around the world. They were created by the first one in Bologna in Italy. It was Christian people that created the modern world.
Absolutely.
So, people don't like that, then they can create their own history. But this was, there were a lot of good values there. And one of them that Christ gave to us was humility. The idea that other people aren't better. Other people don't necessarily know more. And that's kind of how I am being this whole way. If someone said to me, oh, oh, Jim, you know what? Here's a picture here of 215 bodies. I actually dug last night,
Yeah.
they're 215 bodies, and it turns out they're all children, and they were all at the school,
Yeah.
and they were all missing, and they were all bludgeoned to death or hanged or burnt or whatever. Then
Yeah.
I would go,
Exactly.
oh my gosh, Patrick, everything
That'd be
I
horrific.
would go, everything
Yeah.
I said was wrong. But I changed my mind. I would say I was wrong and others were right. But we know that they're not digging because they haven't found anything but a septic bed. They just found tiles in a trench, and that's why it's so uniform. And there's 215. So it's
Hmm.
the whole thing is an absurdity. I was just Sky News. I was just watching today. Is talking about Canada's incredible fake news story. So we're becoming a bit of a laughing stock around the world. Now it's not picked up by our
Yeah.
media, CBC and CTV and Globe and Mail, and there's so many organs in Canada, and the Abbotsford News never wants to talk about anything that goes against the narrative. So they'll be pretending that this happened or hoping it will go away, because I think deep down they know that they really deceived. So the second thing, why
Hmm.
do people do it? Well, I kind of touched on it a little bit. I think people want to have a way of building their career, and I building themselves up, of being important. And I think
Hmm.
religion can be ill used in that way, or any ideology. It can be used, obviously Hitler used the Christian religion, and
Yeah.
Mussolini at times, and that was wrong and horrible. And I'm sure people in all sorts of countries, and Islam is being used by dictators across the Middle East to brutalize their own people. So we know it's not what's written necessarily. It's how's
Hmm.
anything is used. So I think there are a lot of good ideas. And if someone said to me that Indigenous people had a rough past, I'd be the first person who would say, well, I know history well. They certainly, did have a rough past in all sorts of ways. And then I would say, but so did a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And so I really don't want to judge people on the basis of their group, because that's absurd. Because even in my
Mm.
own family, I have a sister who's got a mental disease. I've got another sister who's an incredibly successful judge. We come from the same family. That doesn't mean they've had the same experience in life. And so this
Hmm.
idea of judging people, a group, is complete nonsense. And I haven't done that since the age of 5. I'll judge people as an individual. And I'll say, yeah, of
Right.
course, a lot of people had a bad time. And what can we do today to make that better? Well, the thing that kind of ties this all together, and by the way, listening to you is fantastic. I love everything you said. Tying this all together is the fact um, that there, back 100 years ago or 150 years ago, whenever this school started, in Kamloops, it was well over 100 years ago that school started. People thought we needed to help these people because the buffalo were gone, a lot of games are gone. Settlers had come in here and taken the land, or just simply occupied the land, and so they couldn't live as
Hmm.
they lived before. And some did well in the fur trade and in agriculture and in other areas, but many were marginalized and hungry, and people thought, what's the best thing we could do for them? And they decided that the best thing to do for them is what we do. For about a third of people's lives, or certainly a quarter of people's lives, the average male dies at around 80 or something. I went to school until I was in my mid 20s, like a lot of people do. So that means almost a third of my life I will be in school. So people think that schooling, or let's say a quarter of one's life on average,
Hmm.
people are in school. So we think it's a good idea. So that was given. And residential schools are only for those that weren't near day school or weren't near Canadian school. And Indigenous people today still do the same thing. They're not rejecting Western education, modern education. They're still putting their kids in school. So everybody is in agreement that everything that was
Hmm.
done with Indian residential schools was the right thing to have done, was to give them an education, and as well as other things. And there were lots of other things. Again, there were trips, and as I said, even reunions. This idea that they're, you know, uh, you know, houses of horror is just, people trying to sell a product, and the
Right.
product is probably junk. That's why they're having to sell it hard, because if it was a good product, it would sell on its own. And that's what they're doing here. They're selling it hard in school
Well said.
because none of this woke stuff is educationally valid. If you're going to have your kid in school, Patrick, your kid's going to want to you're going to want your kid to learn how to read, and not just go, oh, phonetics don't work anymore. We're going to do this whole language because somebody. And we're not going to. But you're going to want your kid to read. You're going to want your kid to learn math, the timetable, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to want your kid to to learn all sorts of things. But you're not going to want your kid to memorize the flag, pride, the pride flag colors, or to the 82 different pronouns that that will change again, or the letters and the for the alphabet people that keeps changing, the LGBTQ, and it just keeps changing and changing and changing. And by the way, teachers are being fired for even poking any fun at that, and I'm happy to do that right now because I've been fired, so I've got a sort of new freedom.
Yeah.
It's not a good use of school time for kids. What we were doing 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago, was better. We were not indoctrinating. We're not introducing sexuality and having drag queens reading to the kids. That kind of stuff was not there. Yeah. So does that make it a good tie-in that there was nothing wrong about Indian residential schools. There's nothing wrong about people wanting to help make it even, saying that they didn't do enough, or in some cases they failed kids. There's nothing wrong with any of that. We're just having a normal discussion. But what we recognize is we need to make schools better. It's never a good idea to have a child go to a school far from one's parents. But it still happens. Mm-hmm. And where I live in Surrey, there's all sorts of Chinese and Korean kids here. Their parents send them to here, and they live in basement apartments and with billeted with families. I meet them all the time. It's still happening. Kids are sent away for an education, but it's not a good idea. So we're better and smarter today. We're educating Indigenous people in their home communities. But why people have to go Indigenous, or Indian residential schools are all so horrible? They have to start this way. What do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean they are horrible? What was the alternative? Everything should be. You should ask compared to what? So if you didn't educate them and it was done freely and they got food and shelter, and many of those kids didn't have this stuff before they taken, they were saved. Exactly right. What should they do? A third of kids weren't given an education. A third of Indigenous kids weren't given any education at all. Was that better? Like, I don't understand. But I can't have a conversation with you. I can with you because you're a smart, nice, reflective person. But you can't do that with someone who's drunk this Kool-Aid and is just so enraged by it all that they right away they start calling you names and walk away.
Yeah. And drinking the Kool-Aid, I think, is a great way to put that, because it's kind of it's almost this societal suicide. Like, we're gonna devolve into barbarism if we keep down this track, right? And I think you put that so eloquently, in that every institution has its abuses, right? And yes, we should have systems in place for accountability, and that always happens. Like, it's funny, the things we focus on though are kind of those attached to this white guilt thing amongst teachers. Unfortunately, I was reading an article not too long ago about because it's always the Catholics get a lot of heat for sexual abuse, right? And well, they should in some cases, right? But like, you look at sexual abuse amongst teachers, and it's actually worse in many areas, right? But we only talk about the Catholics, and we don't talk about that happening in public schools, right? And so why is that? And why is that? Why do we pick and choose who gets to be the victims, right? And who are the aggressors? And I think it comes back to narrative. I wanted to get to as well. Well, kind of two things. I'd love to come around to gender ideology, which you touched on a couple times, because that's one that's really concerning as a parent as well. And then I also just kind of, with Abbotsford, what do we do? Like, because I guess that's kind of my frustration right now, is, again, I'm probably homeschooling my child, but I know everyone can't do that. There are people that have to send their kids to public school, right? Both parents are working. There's tons of different situations where homeschooling or private school is not an option for a lot of families. So for parents who are concerned and feel like they don't have an option, we're electing people who supposedly have our backs, right? Who are not woke ideologues or social justice warriors, apparently. And that's just, the stuff is still happening. So do you have an action plan? What's an actionable step or actionable steps we can take as parents in Abbotsford to confront this kind of nonsense?
Yeah, I think it's not just nonsense. I think it's damaging. I think you don't want to talk about sexuality with a 5-year-old, and they're doing that. They're doing
Absolutely,
surveys
yeah.
all the time, right across Canada, with kids as young as kindergarten about what they think, their sexuality is, and if they're comfortable in gender, and again, it's not boys and girls, it's other things. And so just the very nature of, I just don't understand why people can't figure out, you don't bring your politics, religion, and sex, particularly if you have deviancies, into, through the school door.
Oh, there's a term people aren't going to like.
But I will use it again. It's deviant. It's
Yeah,
deviant.
no,
You know what? They're
I agree.
against the nuclear family. They're against, in Abbotsford, there's a school that banned Mother's Day because it might make kids uncomfortable that didn't have mothers. There might be a kid who has 2 fathers. And
Are you comfortable naming the school?
I can't remember what school, but people could research it. There's another school in Abbotsford. They had kids wearing backpacks to and from school called equity backpacks. And so I don't think that's right. I think it's manipulating kids. When you're because in reality, kids at a young age, they'll do anything. You said to kids, hey, I want you to shower with that backpack on. Some kids would, many kids would, maybe all of them would if they're young enough and if they like their teacher enough. You can get kids to wear orange shirts, white shirts, green shirts, black shirts, because they're doing that. And particularly orange shirts, 3 times or more times. But my point is, they're doing this with kids, so it's wrong. So yeah, there is a game plan. It's very easy. And can I ask you? Can I mention the first name of the 3 trustees that I felt were really supportive of me? Is that the right thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One's Corky, and another's Mike, and another's Jared. And they, I think they're good men, smart. And I think they have values that are shared by so many people in the community. I think they're well suited to the role of trustee. But they fired me. So my father was the Chief Justice. I come from a family of lawyers and doctors and other professionals. My 3 children are lawyers. I'm not someone who's uneducated. I'm not someone who is bad. I was named a principal at age 33 of a junior college. I've won 2 teaching awards. I am not garbage. I should not have been walked out of my school and fired. So I would like people in Abbotsford to start asking questions. Why is it that even decent trustees are so overwhelmed by the bullying tactics of others that they're accepting my firing? That people accept that the Abbotsford News is never going to mention about the fact that a teacher, it happened to me twice, walked out of school, but the second time it was right out of my career. And it's really quite something that people are accepting the people above them. So there's various ways of lying to people. One way of lying to them is just not tell them about something. And so, or telling half the story or whatever. Anyway, in this particular case, there's a teacher. Well, I have lots of kids that contacted me after I was, out of school, contacted me and said, I was your best teacher and I was this and that, good things, lovely things. Parents contacted me. It doesn't matter. Yeah, as soon as you're not one of these crazy gender ideologists or whatever, ideologues, as soon as you're somebody who's not, part of that indoctrination program, which is schools everywhere. So it's not invented in Abbotsford. Then you get in trouble. It's not, kids get in trouble. As kids talk about or say the wrong thing in class, all of a sudden Yeah, and you know, an Islamophobe or you know, a transphobe or you know, racist or you know what, all these things, sexist. You know what, all these they're names, they're bad names. So it's just quieting things. So what I think the game plan should be is don't abandon public schools. Public schools have lots of money,
Mm.
great, you know, for great facilities. I think you know, the teachers are well trained and nice, well, great teachers. At Mowat, you know, you know, so many really great teachers. But what's happening is they're afraid to tell kids the truth about all sorts of things. And so what
Mm.
happens is you know, it's this a strange acceptance that people can't do anything about it. And I know there are many people in North Korea, for example, who don't like Kim Jong-un, who don't like the way North Korea is. But nobody can open their mouths, or they and their family would all be dead. Um, but why are we
Right.
bringing that to Canada? Why are we allowing that to come into our schools, where there's this new sort of McCarthyism or Inquisition going back many centuries, where you
Mm.
either have to think this way or you're going to be really horribly punished. So to me, the solution is people like you, Patrick. You're reaching out um, to me, and guess how many other people in Abbotsford have reached out to me. Now, right after, as I said, students reached out to me, and then that was quickly nixed by the school because they found out about it, and by me because I didn't want kids to get in trouble with any association with me. But I heard
Mm-hmm.
only from one teacher, and it was beautiful. And the teacher said
Wow.
I got this. The teachers at school were all supporting me, but they knew it was best for them not to get involved. So I know
Right.
that there's support out there, but very few people know my story. So it means a lot to me that you're speaking to me, because my story has gone international. You see how the people. If you've looked at my
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, I've had some tweets that have had you know, it's just amazing the amount of hits. I had one just yesterday that or 2 days ago that's 40,000 views. Like, there are people following me and across the world. I'm communicating with people around the world, but particularly in Canada. So people are interested in my story, you know, and again, I've been on not just Rebel News, Laura Southern, and American people have interviewed like um, and Benjamin Boyce and so on. But I'm my story is an interesting one. Being fired for telling the
Mm-hmm.
truth, but that's the day we live
Absolutely.
in. And to come back to gender ideology, and I know I've talked too much, but the gender ideology doesn't really
Not at
interest
all. Not at
me,
all.
because there's nothing to say other than it's
Right.
just completely wrong. Look, I talk about sex
Yeah.
with my kids. I make joke with sex with my kids. We say I talk about sex. There's no limits, because my kids are all in their 30s, and
Right.
and they would
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
brought it up. I'm not a parent that's, hey kids, let's talk about sex. I would never do that with my children, even in their 30s. But if it
Yeah.
comes up, we have an open discussion. I never did that with my children when they were in primary school. I didn't think they were ready to
Yeah.
learn about, you know, the different ways that people, you know, different sexual acts. They talk, and the books they have in school. Soji 1, 2, 3 was created and quickly adopted by our woke government.
Mm-hmm.
It was created by the people who have the most extreme, I'm trying to think of a good word to use, sexual practices.
Mm-hmm.
Why do kids need to know about that? So yeah, there's nothing more for me to say. It's just dead wrong. What interests me is what I am, and that is a good teacher who thinks students should be able to ask questions, think for themselves, and walk away and become the person that they want to be, and not what the superintendent of the day or the prime minister of the day or whoever else
Yeah.
decides they should be. That's
Mm-hmm.
wrong.
Absolutely. And so much of it is cloaked in compassion, right? Like the reason we teach gender ideology is so that you're not like a jerk to your trans friend or whatever. But it's what's so ridiculous to me about that argument is that you can teach to. I came from the traditional schools here in Abbotsford, and you can teach respect. You can teach people to not be jerks to each other. With zero mention of race or sexuality, you just be like, hey, if someone looks different from you, don't be a jerk to that person, right? Like, it's very simple to teach good values and ethical treatment of different people, without pushing an ideology, without exposing 6-year-olds to trans ideology. And I think it's so perverse that if there's any element, and I think there's a lot of good evidence that there is, if there's any element of what's called like psychological epidemic or social contagion, to specifically the trans issue, right? Where there's kind of in the LGB part of that alphabet, right? There's an argument for biological indicators that people are born homosexual or that kind of thing. But with trans specifically, there's much less of an argument of that. There's studies being done and stuff that shows that it spreads socially, and if that's the case, you're handing children outlandishly high suicidal ideation rates, right? And you're handing them gender dysphoria where they wouldn't have had that otherwise. And that's so abusive and perverse to tell a 6-year-old or any age child, you were born in the wrong body. You were born wrong. And we should hand you hormones and mutilation to help you fit what you actually are, based on no good evidence at all. So for myself, raising a child, that's horrific to me. that's one of my deepest fears is that my child gets exposed to that too early. And just for parents to know, I'll just talk about briefly. I know you were tweeting this as well. It's on the calendar in Abbotsford School District, right? Conservative Abbotsford, Bible Belt Abbotsford. March 31st, we just had Transgender Day of Visibility on the Abbotsford School District calendar. And you can tell me, I found it listed on the elementary school calendars across the Abbotsford School District website. That's all ages, right? That's on the calendar for all of the school district. Does every school participate in that, or how does that work practically?
Yeah, you just said so many things that I have to answer one thing just before that.
Sure,
and,
yeah.
and man, you're just right on, and that is, this isn't sincere. If you want, you don't first of all need to tell kids these days about being respectful. They've already, their parents already told them how to be respectful, or their church or their synagogue or gurdwara or whatever, or their friends or whatever. They know that. It's amazing. At my high school in Surrey for a long time, I always ran games for kids with physical disabilities. And when the first few years I was doing it, I had all these kids saying, "Can we be involved? Can we be involved?" And after a few years, I had the whole school involved, running events and doing things. The whole school wanted to. All the kids at school wanted to be involved. The kids don't need to be told not to be a racist. There might be some exceptions, but that's just absolute nonsense. Kids have that instinct. They're not doing it because kids need to know these things. They're doing it to look good. Look at me, Justin Trudeau, saying, I'm going to show how bad we treated Indigenous people in the past. So in the future, people think, look, I'm the big savior of the Indigenous people because look at all the good things I did. The reality, people in the past were also trying to help Indigenous people. So that to me is a little bit upsetting. The idea that people are thinking they're not really meaning to do that. If they're bringing drag queens in to read to elementary school kids, they're not doing it because they think kids need it. They're doing it because they're proving to someone above them, look at me, I'm more woke than the next person, promote me. And this is a game, again, if it was Nazism, people would be walking around with, I don't know, beating up Jewish people or breaking their glass windows and their shops, crystal knock, because it would show everybody else how imbued I am with this wonderful new idea. So I just don't buy the idea at all that any of this is sincere. It's sincere. Everybody deep down knows this is garbage educationally. This is so wrong. And I just also say about the homosexual thing, and I completely forgot what you wanted me to answer, but I love listening to you, man. And that's the homosexual thing. I am so against that stuff being taught in elementary school. And two of my sisters are gay. And my sisters and I love each other deeply.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with their sexuality. And they agree with me. Get it out of the schools until kids are ready, mature enough to be able to handle things. Now, if it comes up, if it comes up and it's important, and so you need to talk about something, sometimes it comes up. Maybe there is going to be a 7-year-old who's saying, "I actually think I'm a boy and not a girl." I love the way you talked about it. Just be understanding and provide the kid with the services that kid needs and the empathy. And that doesn't mean puberty blockers. It doesn't mean surgery. It just means let's kind of wait a little bit until the kid has a little bit older and a better understanding of human sexuality before that child does something that's going to alienate himself from his peer group.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and yeah, to be teaching that kind of stuff, especially at the ages they're teaching it, just has so little to do with education. And I think you're absolutely right. I think you keep coming back to that. It's virtue signaling, or I think narcissism is like the great sin of our generation. Like I think that's one of the biggest things is that we are it's the armchair activists, right? It's the posting the black square on Instagram, or it's just I'm going to do the bare minimum. On subjects I have no knowledge about, just to appear like I'm an ally, like I'm there, like I'm a good person. It's kind of that searching for absolution thing. It's I need to signal that I'm one of the good ones, right? And when you do that on subjects that you know nothing about, you're actually doing the exact opposite, right? You're causing a lot of harm because you're spouting off on things you haven't looked into, right? Just from the selfish impulse of wanting to look good or wanting to get that promotion or wanting to get paid more, right? The fact that we have paid diversity, equity, and inclusion roles anywhere is a psyop. Like it's a complete joke, and it's a made up role that's completely unnecessary. But people are making big money from it, right? So why kill the cash cow? The question I was going to ask you just about like specifically Transgender Day visibility on the calendar. How
Thank you.
On a practical level, yeah, no worries. On a practical level, like how is that every school is actively celebrating that, or no worries?
I just it's just this. You keep on saying things that I find fascinating, so I kind of it's hard for me not to want to go back and latch on because I don't want to miss out in commenting on anything you said because you're a distilled thinker and it's again I don't get that because generally when I'm talking about this issue, it's with people that haven't done a lot of thinking about it. They're just sort of going along with it. And so the one thing I wanted to say before coming back to the trans thing is that when I was a young teacher, someone came up with the idea that were they're egg carton classrooms in schools, walls between us. So let's knock down all the walls and then have everybody, like in the old days, the one room schoolhouse. But they did that. It's called the open classroom concept. Okay. And I went to a school that was like that as a student teacher. And it was disastrous. And they did that in Surrey a couple of years ago, the same thing, and it was a disaster, and they quickly put in walls. And it's called Salish. Anyhow, it's a high school in Surrey. Someone came up with this idea. As though they have no idea that was a dumb idea 35 years ago, and they're just doing the same dumb idea. Anyhow, but what was interesting, all the teachers lined up like elephants in a parade to go, yes, I'm for the open classroom concept. And the first day that they did it, they were going, can you keep it down? I can't talk to my students because it was just mindless. So people will do all sorts of things to get noticed and to fit in. And look at me in a high school. Someone said to me, oh, you think you're this big anti-conformist, Jim? Look at your clothes. You're the same as everybody else's. So yeah, we all try to work in. But out in high school, everybody wore jeans and a certain type of boot and a certain type of shirt. And yeah, we all want to fit in. So I get all that. So here's my feeling about it depends on the school. It depends on the principal. It depends on lots of things as to a parent community, as to how far they go with the woke stuff. And so if it's International Transsexual Transparency Day, it's funny how they weren't very transparent about it because they know that there's a lot of opposition. So they are anything but transparent. And so there's lots of contradictions to everything that they do here. So some teachers would have stopped and done everything, had, a big celebration for transsexuals. And other schools, they would have just, might have mentioned in the morning, and the PA, and then that was it type thing. So it's, who knows? But I just, what I don't understand here is, again, just, and I'm realizing that time is short. I think that I've proved to you, Patrick, because you said some nice things to me, that I'm not a guy, and you followed some stuff on Twitter and stuff, that I'm not a guy who's uneducated or irrational or hateful or anything bad. I'm just a normal person, and I've had lots of students who have said to me that I've made a difference in their lives, and other teachers have too. So I just feel that I've had, like other teachers, success. So I don't think I should be fired and be done as a teacher. So just coming back to my situation, relating all this, and that is, a school is really more than anything else a place where people go not just to have their kids babysit, but that's part of it, right? Because you mentioned in the show, right? You don't want, some people can't afford this or homeschooling, or the reality is it's free, and there's somebody else watching your kids. And they're doing lots of good things for your kids. They're getting them to exercise and get along with other kids and pick up their mess. And there's all these, schools are a great thing. And so that's my feeling about this is, school's a great thing. And the main thing we do in school is we chat what we're doing, and we learn about each other, and we hopefully educate each other. I'm coming away from this with, feeling that I've gained something in talking to you, not just a nice experience, but I've gained something. And I hope maybe some of the viewers of this will feel that they may have learned something or whatever, and that's why we're doing it. So why is it in schools that they're trying to close down people like me and all I've done? Like, I get it. If I was, there was a teacher in Chilliwack who had sexual relations and, touching kids and all that, got a month's suspension. I was fired for bringing in a different perspective. And in my case, it was historically true, and everything I'm saying. And so on Twitter, I'm much more so. I'm talking about all the books they're burning. In some schools, they're actually burning books as a ceremony. I'm not making this.
No.
My school, Mowat, they had over 200 books in the library that were torn with a sharp object. So they couldn't be, not only were they to be thrown out, but they couldn't be reused. Nobody else could take them home. They were defaced. And everything that I'm saying to you is true, because if it weren't true, I could be in trouble saying it. And so this is the world that we're just for 1 second. Lori, you get my cord from downstairs, sweetheart? Sorry, I just saw my battery's a little bit low, and my wife's doing it. So I know there's things that are happening in Abbotsford. One thing that I learned in Abbotsford was that when senior managers retire, they get a huge cash payment. And that's taxpayer money. And that's something that's not transparent. That's done on this side. So I think there's a lot of stuff that happens, and that's in all institutions. There's grift, there's corruption, there's things like that. Yeah. But if you are taking away a book that's of literary value, then teachers should have a right to say, whoa, if you're bringing in people into the classroom or telling kids or trying to groom kids into a deviant or an alternative lifestyle from what their parents want for their child, then that's something that someone should be able to talk about. So the thing that's most surprising with me is that nobody ever in this whole 4 years of punishing me, of my gauntlet of punishment, nobody talked to me. And when I was fired, they finally met me. So after 4 years, I finally met these people, trustees and senior managers who wrote all these horrible things about me, and finally met them. And they gave me 20 minutes, and I wasn't allowed to ask them any questions. And they didn't say anything to me. I was given 20 minutes to explain why I didn't think I should be fired. So we still have never had a conversation. And none of this would have happened if we had a conversation. So to me you asked me earlier on,
like adults,
what am I? I could say I'm Christian, or I'm conservative. Maybe I'm neither of those things. I don't even care what I am. I care about one thing, that when I go into school, I'm a good teacher. And a good teacher is a person who is able to have a conversation with kids without imposing on those children me and all my whatever and my imperfections and my things that aren't, that they're going to be better by being them, but they're going to be also better by listening to me and learning from me a little bit. But nobody wanted to not only to have me as a teacher, it's just there's a resistance to anything I said. And one of the things I said, Patrick, was that there are no graves. There are no graves there. And they're not going to ever dig them up because they know there's no graves there. Because there'd be a record if there are 215 kids gone missing in one school that was in the middle of the reserve. And in Kamloops, it's in the middle of the city of Kamloops, in the middle of the reserve, and half the staff was native because they had people who were cleaning, cooking, sweeping, and they had, so my point is, and they had kids going home at the end of the day. It wasn't all kids that were in residence at this, and their teachers that were white. Some of them had or worked at the school. Some of them had kids there. There were white kids in residential schools. If dad was the principal or whatever, like someone would know if there was one missing or murdered child at that school in Kamloops in the middle of the reserve.
Yeah,
215 is anyhow. I'm logical enough to go. Okay, we're not really trying to be serious here.
Well, what's wild, Jim, is that there are Indigenous leaders commenting on these issues that agree with you. So it's like you don't need to like, oh, it's here some Christian white guy saying this, right? It's like there are Indigenous leaders and people that went to these schools even that were saying this is not what happened, right? These are outside of the Kamloops schools, there are other schools that are going, yeah, this is just like a normal grave. We've known about this forever. Like there's no crime.
No, but there wasn't a grave. There's no grave because.
Oh yeah, the Kamloops one, correct. I was talking about
the other. That's I apologize.
Other instances,
but the thing about Kamloops is important to know. They have a graveyard.
That's right.
So where they say that were the graves weren't in the graveyard. So why would the community allow that to happen? And then again, how would the community not know if 215 kids and they're small? It's a small reserve. How would they not know when 215 kids were missing? There's never been in any residential school in the history of residential schools a single letter ever written by a parent going, I can't find my kid. So I'm of the opinion there was not a single child that was ever murdered or missing. What they don't know is the names of all the kids that were there at all the schools, because back in time, people didn't walk around with identification in their pocket, and things got lost. We didn't have computers, whatever. Things get lost over time. But the Catholics, and Kamloops kept pretty good records, better than most.
Yeah. No, I think And like I said, I'll link in the description to this National Post article that it's a great summary. It's a long article. But yeah, it talks about how they're even kind of comparing the supposed 215 children to the list of, I think, the 3,000 around Indigenous children known to have gone missing. None of them lined up. Like there was no.
But let me say that I don't think they're not known to go missing. And again, I'm speaking as someone who's part of the lead research group in Canada, which is full of jurists and professors, and they invited me in. I don't know why they want me, but as I said, that I have a doctorate and I'm learned in the area, and so they don't believe there's any kid missing. They just don't have the record for every single child, the death record for every single child. So they certainly know every single child that died. They almost every single child, they have an idea of how it was. But there's some, when you think of, you're dealing with 150,000 kids, and they're down to, they don't believe it's 4,100. That's what it said in Truth and Reconciliation. They believe it's about a third of that. Right. So let's say it's about 1,000 kids, or we'll go higher conservatively. Let's say even 1,500 kids that they don't know how they died. That's 1,500 out of 150,000. And many of these schools, some of these schools, they're including schools that began in the 1830s, called industrial schools in Ontario. So yes, they don't have records of absolutely everything, but they have no evidence of a parent ever saying that his or her child, or a village or a chief or anybody saying our child's missing. So and again, if someone wants to prove me wrong, then I'll bring them in front of my research group. It's not my group. I mean, I'd say people who are more educated in this area, anthropologists and historians and judges and so forth, people who taught at the schools, people who spent their whole life working with residential schools are all part of this group. And they will say to you, where's the evidence of a single missing child? Where's the evidence more glaringly of a single murder child? There's no evidence. And
so what you're saying is these records necessarily, they're just missing records. They're not indicative of abuse or criminality. There's no evidence of that. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. But okay, thank you for saying that. But somehow the rest of Canada doesn't even want to think that. And something else. So at Kamloops, not only were they, the 215 were buried away from the cemetery. It didn't make any sense to the local people. Why would they knew about it. So they'd have to not know about it. So how would they not know about 215 kids being tortured and murdered right underneath their feet? So the whole thing, and all of a sudden, one of our children disappeared. We didn't talk about it. Like the whole thing is absurd. But there were only, but Kamloops was a bit more recent. They know the number of kids that died there. 51. I have seen, and I can produce it to you, after the show if you ever wonder sometime. I have already seen the death certificates for 49 of the 51. I have been told that they found the other 2. So they know how all 51 children that died tragically from disease, because any child dying is heart-wrenching. They know how they died. There is no missing record in Kamloops. So it's not only there's no missing child, there's not in Kamloops even a missing record. The whole thing is apocryphal. The whole thing is as fictional as the Tooth Fairy, and yet
that's so wild.
and yet I was fired for simply saying one thing. And I said the disease and I said particularly tuberculosis. And there was a sanatorium, a place where they put people who were afflicted with tuberculosis, a 20-minute drive away from the school. So yes, it was sad, but a lot of Canadians died of tuberculosis at that time. And you said at the beginning, you were right on. The main cause of death were exactly what you said: tuberculosis and influenza. So you really know what you're talking about. And we've had a conversation, and nothing I've said you've said, "Oh, Jim, you're a terrible person," and nothing that
nothing you've said would make you a terrible person.
but so why is it that Corky and Jared and Mike and the other 4, and everybody else in management in this Abbotsford School District fired me? And why is it that Abbotsford News isn't reporting on the fact that all of a sudden there's a teacher disappeared? Even what doesn't matter what my story is, it still should be newsworthy that a teacher was here one day and was gone the next. This isn't 1984 where people are disappeared. I've been disappeared. Do you see what I'm saying there? Nobody can ask. The teachers at my school can't talk about me. The kids are told not to contact me or not talk about me. And the parents, I can't have any contact with the parents or anybody. I've been told that repeatedly before I was fired. And I certainly wouldn't now because it'd be uncomfortable for people. Nobody can communicate with anybody. I have just gone.
Now, what you're saying about, especially like the 3 names you mentioned, are you saying like they led your fire? Because those are the 3 like that I would, that I saw platforms that I would say like have the more conservative leaning platforms. And so were they the ones leading your firing, or like complicit, or like what were the roles of it's setting 7 trustees? Like what
all I can say about them, and not only because we have to be careful what we say about people. Sure. They're really nice to me. The 3 of them were really nice to me.
Right. Okay.
The 3 of them never argued with me. So I did have communication with those 3 trustees. I'd never even met the other 4 before they fired me. And I'd never met any of my employers, senior managers that wrote terrible letters about me. But I did have private communication during the election with the 3 people that I mentioned. One of them actually on not during the election period, at any rate. But I want to be, everything I say is accurate. And the communication, I will never share with anybody because it was private communication. But I want to say this: they're smart. They get it. They know what's right for kids. They have the right values. They know what traditional education is worth. There's nothing that I would say ever that's critical of those three people. So
Right.
why did they fire? Okay. Maybe they didn't fire me. Maybe it was a 4-3 vote.
Right. Okay.
No one's telling me.
So that's what I'm saying. Earlier, it sounded like they were leading the charge against you.
But they still were part of firing me. Right. They haven't spoken out against that. They didn't. No one's reached out to me since and said, or to the media or anywhere. The whole thing is Jim is puff again, disappeared. No one has said this was wrong. So the National Post 3 times has had big articles about me. My story is blowing up. I had, people in distant parts of the world have heard about me, and I've heard about that. And so why?
But you can't get any coverage or.
So why, if they actually are sincere about the things they said to me and wrote to me, why did they go quiet?
Yeah.
And you can cut this out if you want, but why did they go quiet? Because this is what's happening. This is the world is. This is the one thing that I have that other people might not have, other teachers might not have. And that it's a combination of 3 things. I'm old. and I have built enough up that I can survive if someone takes away my job. Mm-hmm. Okay. The second thing is I'm confident in myself. I'm confident, and that's it. I'm lucky in that way. I'm confident. If someone were to say to me I'm wrong, I'd look at the person and I'd say, prove to me I'm wrong. If someone said, get out of my way, I'm crossing, I'm walking in front of you, I would say, well, you're going to have to go through me. I'm confident about me because I know me. I'm a good person and I'm tough. The third thing is I'm educated. I know I'm not making stuff up. I know what I'm doing. I went and I spent my whole life being in a school and in different roles. I know what I'm talking about, and I know anyhow. So that's a good combination. So I'm free because I'm financially free. I'm tough. I'm going to stand my ground, and I'm not an idiot. I know what I'm talking about. So that's a nice combination. Most teachers don't have that. Right. Most teachers aren't 64, for example. And they don't want to risk losing their job by standing up. So I'm somebody that's alone in Canada. I don't know. No one's ever told me either, or told me recently that there's another teacher that was fired. I've heard of ones investigated and suspended and various things for this sort of being anti-woke, but no one being fired for what I did, which was to stand my ground. And the ground was that we have to teach the historical record. We can't make it up with kids. Yeah. They have a right to know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the fact that this happened in Abbotsford is something I think the reason I have you on is because I think one of Abbotsford's largest problems is we're very, Canadians largely, but I think Abbotsford as well is we're very passive, we're very apathetic. And so I've heard crazy things about stuff going on in Abbotsford schools, litter boxes in certain schools, that kind of thing, for like cat identifying students. I don't know the truth of those kind of things, but if I'm fairly reliable sources on that. So if that's happening, why are parents not like going, what is going on?
But that's my whole point. But why is it they don't? Yeah. Because they don't know. So what's happened? What you do is you get rid, and again back to the novel 1984, is they get rid of anybody who remembers that life was once better. In Air Force One, that's in England. Once a time it was better, and I'm that repository. I'm that one teacher that others remember that school wasn't like this. So they had to get rid of me, and they also have to make sure nobody knows about me, and people still, for the most part. So I have probably written to the Abbotsford News, always polite, respectful. That's my nature. About 10 times. They've never written me back. and they've never written about my story. I wrote to the Chilliwack newspaper, which is very woke, ridiculously woke. One of the trustees, I looked her up and I saw her fully naked because she posted a picture of herself fully naked. So that's one of the trustees.
Okay.
And
Right
so I'm just telling you what schools are. Their schools are. If you doubt that, I can show you after.
Yikes.
So wrote back and told me that I was completely wrong, and we had an exchange. And wrote me.
This is from the Chilliwack
newspaper? So they never wrote about my story. And now they'll believe me on the grave thing, even though the whole world knows it's made up. But at least in Chilliwack, the person wrote back to me. The National Post, which is, I wrote to editors there, they all wrote back to me. Long before they wrote about me, they wrote back to me at least. And I don't understand why in Abbotsford, the people there are allowing themselves to be made just, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. They're just being completely dumbed down into some sort of, and I don't want to be negative toward the people in Abbotsford. I love the people in Abbotsford, but into a group that isn't to know about some irresponsible financial expenditures of the board, some treatment of kids. And I'm going to leave you with one specific example. I can't talk about all the things because some like the equity backpacks I could mention because it's in the news. But the one that was most awful was at William A. Davidson, if I've got the right name of the school, a middle school, but in Abbotsford, there's a woman who 3 years ago, she made a mistake. She had kids learning about residential schools. But as part of her lesson one day, she asked the kids not just to think about all the negative things, but one day she asked them to go home and think about something positive about residential schools, like it was a free education. Now, the reaction to that was that they immediately suspended and investigated her. The superintendent, others in the district, the Minister of Education, the teachers union, all commented. The newspapers refer to her lesson plan as, quote, disgusting, like the Thai, if you want to look up. And that went around. So by association, she was disgusting for asking kids to consider. And yet one of the goals of education, according to the ministry guidelines, is critical thinking. So how can you make a judgment of residential schools if you're only hearing one side of the story? The Dalai Lama talked about truth being a crystal. All the different facets or sides together complete the truth. She didn't do anything wrong whatsoever. They were saying terrible things to the media because a parent went to the media, CBC, right away, wearing war paint, and everybody took her side and criticized the teacher. They didn't talk to her before this happened. They didn't even talk to the teacher, including her own union, provincial union. So this is the world that we're living in. So when I said to you, no one spoke to me before firing me, and they never will have a conversation. My employers at Abbotsford School District, but they did it to her too, and that's in the news. So there's nobody going, oh, what? Maybe Jim McMurtry isn't saying the truth. Of course, it was all over the news, forever for her, forever, because they didn't mention her name, thankfully. But a lot of people in the community know her name because they know it was the teacher. The female medical teacher teaches social studies at William A. Davidson. So there's a William F. Davidson, whatever, anyhow, it's something like that. But it's online forever for the rest of her life that she did something that was disgusting.
Is she a teacher still or no?
I have no idea. I wanted many times to reach out to her, but everybody is so, my union, my employer, everyone's saying, you can't talk to anybody. You can't. Don't you dare talk to anybody. But I wrote to the superintendent and to the director of curriculum about my disappointment, and I did it politely, but I said it was wrong. They didn't talk to her first. And I was called before the board, and they didn't talk to me. They just dressed me down for maybe 5 minutes. And then I started speaking back, and then they ended the meeting. And so they don't want to hear from their teachers. They want to direct their teachers. And that's okay if they're more enlightened than I am. But it's not okay when they're indoctrinating children. And so look, you might cut out most of this. I don't care what you cut out or what you don't cut out. I don't care anything. All I'm saying is,
I'm inclined to not cut out.
Yeah, well, that'd be it. All I'm saying is, I bet 99.9% of the people in Abbotsford don't know anything about my story. Because the newspapers cut it down. All the institutions, I wrote to the politicians, the MLAs, didn't hear from anybody. The federal, the MPs, I wrote to, didn't hear back from anybody. Nobody is wanting to communicate with me. Nobody is wanting to know my story. It's just they're all like circling wagons. They don't want anybody. What they're doing is they're protecting, which they think they're protecting the reputation of the Abbotsford School District. But what they're doing is far worse. What they're doing is they're waiting until McMurtry and others will come out eventually out of the woodwork. Right now, it's just me. That I'm going to have so much influence. I've already had a lot, not just through Twitter and thousands of followers, but there are teachers and districts all across the country and Western world who are exchanging emails with me and texts and stuff. We're all together in this. We need to return schools to the 3 R's and the ABCs and the things that the parents consensually have agreed upon. And there's nothing wrong with teaching kids about anything. I don't think there's any topic that should be off, but kids have to be ready for it. And it has to be consensually, it has to be something that we come to an agreement together on. Parents are a stakeholder, teachers, students, older people in the community. Like, why is it that someone can come up with this crazy thing that everyone wears a black shirt to school when, as you know, in Mussolini's fascist Italy, they had all the kids wearing black shirts? That's troubling to older Italian people. So maybe before they have kids wearing black shirts or brown shirts and all sorts of color shirts, maybe they need to think for a second. But they're not going to do it because they're just so convinced in the Abbotsford School District that everything they're doing, because they're so woke and virtuous. Of course, they're virtuous in an insincere way because it's just lip service. But that's the world. That's the world. I don't think when Justin Trudeau got down on his knee on a cemetery with a teddy bear, and it turns out, of course, it wasn't. It was a Catholic cemetery. That he really is Mr. Do Everything, because during the first September 30th national holiday, he was in Tofino surfing, but he didn't tell the people he was doing that. He lied and said he was at his office in Ottawa, and that's why he couldn't visit the Kamloops Reserve. It's a show. It's a show for the people at the top because it's about money and power and influence. And the thing that makes teachers a little bit different, I think, not all of us, is that some of us could make more money than we're making teaching. Maybe not me, but I know some of the teachers that I meet, I go, man, you're smart. And I have some teacher friends that went on to become, lawyers or doctors, whatever, so they're, and I just go, it's just so weird for me. Why are you going into teaching? And people ask me, why did I go into teaching when I have a doctorate? And I go, well, there's 2 reasons: July and August. And but it's and I think you missed my joke earlier on when I said I became a math teacher of young kids because I wanted to make the little things in life count.
I know, I did catch that. Actually, you did catch that. Yeah.
And I'm hoping your viewers. I think teaching is anytime is engaging, is trying to be interesting. And so what I'd say about teachers is if there's anything that makes us a little bit different than some other professions, like, I don't want to put other professions down, but let's say CEOs generally, I don't know, right? Or entrepreneurs, is that we're a little less guided by money.
Right.
And a little bit more guided about doing what's right for kids. And if we see a kid without a lunch at school, then we share our lunch. And if we have a kid who needs help, then we stay after school and chat with the kid, or help the kid with the math or whatever. Like that's what teachers do.
Yeah.
We're not bad people. I'm not a bad person. And so we don't make it a better world by going around and being authoritarian and punishing people for having a different point of view.
Yeah, totally. And I think so much of that, I think, and this has been in the universities for decades at this point, but it's kind of, I mean, a lot of it is like Marxist, communist ideology, kind of co-opting, kind of weaponizing and hijacking the compassion motivation in a lot of teachers, I think. So when you look at, you mentioned critical race theory and a lot of that stuff. A lot of that stuff has kind of been co-opted to get teachers to think that like they're doing something good for students, right? And by making everyone more aware of historical injustice and all that, that we're going to reach a more equitable society, right? But what you mentioned earlier is you're throwing out kind of everything that made the West as tolerant and prosperous as it did, right? Which is individual, like the individual is sacred, right? We're taking everything that made the West great and throwing it out the window. And then we're taking everything that made the Soviet Union what it was, and then trying to force that into, and we're going to be surprised when we end up like the Soviet Union, right? We're doing everything they did, the collectivists and the communists, and we're going to do it on the, under the label of compassion, and we're going to end up at the same place and go, how did we get here, right? And I think...
But can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Sure, yeah.
Because this is what you keep doing. You keep on saying really amazing things, and I want to just respond to it.
Absolutely, go ahead.
But if you go on too long, then I forget to answer something.
My apologies.
But you said something that's really important. Yeah, it's not a good idea. It's Marxism. It's been tried. It didn't work. Mm-hmm. It's looking at people as part of groups, and it's putting one group up by killing the others or putting the others down. So you're putting down the whites or the Chinese or whoever is more successful, and you're raising group X, Y, Z up. But you're not making it better. You're just changing the heads, the seats of the top.
Exactly.
Anyhow, so I just want to say this one thing because it's so valuable. The best book that I had when I was in school, arguably, was To Kill a Mockingbird. I've had 2 generations of kids read To Kill a Mockingbird, my students. It's one of the most censored books right now. And you won't find it read at Mowat.
Jeez.
Because so what they're doing is they think it's better because you take out the N word or you take out this word or that word or you ban Dr. Seuss now and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Roald Dahl. They're banning James Bond. And Mowat, the only book that was popular with kids in grade 9 at Mowat, and I taught English grade 9 one year, was Agatha Christie's and Then There Were None. That was the one they liked best. And it was in my classroom, and I got it because everyone said it was the best book to read with them. And then someone said, oh, you can't read that. Because its original title 100 years before was different.
Right.
So what? It was 100 years ago, and it's nothing to do with it. And it went from 10 little and something to 10 little Indians to now, and then there were none. But there's nothing in the book or movie or anything that's racist. Right. It was from an old nursery rhyme because what Agatha Christie wanted, she had 10 characters. So she played it, she used a nursery rhyme as part of as one of her clues. Right. So the only one that she had was that. And of course, when she lived, the N word wasn't, people didn't see it bad. So we can't judge them. It was a different time.
Yeah.
So by taking out the baby, taking out Kill a Mockingbird or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or whatever, you're taking out the books that kids really love. So you're actually taking away a child's, not taking away, but you're diminishing a child's ability to fall in love with literature at school.
Yeah. Especially with To Kill a Mockingbird, like that, the entire premise of that book is racial cooperation, right? And a white guy at the cost of his own reputation, right? Defending someone.
I'm not, that's me. I'm not a great guy. I'm not a great guy like him. He got out there with his rifle in front of the jail and said, "You're going to come through me before you go get Tom Robinson." and he was willing to give up his life, even though his kids didn't have a mother, and they were young. He was willing to do that because the book was about what was true and good and beautiful and just.
No, it's a wonderful book. Yeah, it's one
And
of my
that's what you want to. That's what you want to teach from. You don't want to teach from some social justice stuff about learning how a kid was raped. You read about a kid being raped by her father at age 10. There's a book called Identity that's in Abbotsford schools and library. And if you don't believe me, people don't believe me, then there's a parent in Abbotsford called Pierre Barnes.
I was going to ask you if you knew Pierre Barnes.
Pierre is a friend, but Pierre, I met him and I've talked to him, and Pierre has identified all sorts of books that talk about incest in descriptive ways, and for that kids read in grades 1 or 3 or 5. Yeah. They're bringing those books in, and they're taking it To Kill a Mockingbird.
He's built a whole database just for parents to look at. I think he's just Pierre Barnes on Twitter if you just search that. But yeah, he's built a whole database of the kind of books that these woke ideologues are bringing into schools, and they're often they're pornographic, honestly, and pornographic, and yeah, you mentioned from disordered sexualities, right? They're preaching LGBTQ ideologies, and they're pornographic. They're images often, and they're seen in elementary school libraries.
Yeah, and I've seen the words masturbation and cunnilingus with accompanying diagrams. And Soji 1, 2, 3 is not for high school kids. It's in the elementary schools, primary school.
Yeah, unbelievable. I remember because when I grew up, this was not too long ago. I'm only 30. When I grew up, I remember I think grade 6 or 7 was the age. But yeah, we're teaching sex and biology. It's a week-long thing, and we send permission slips home with the parents with the curriculum. Here's what we're talking about. We're splitting up the boys and girls into different classrooms, and that's how they did sex ed back then, right? And that's only 15 years ago, and so the fact that now I was reading Abbotsford School District's guidance on this. If a student starts to maybe signal that they're the opposite gender or something, for example, parental consent or bringing the parent into the conversation is not encouraged. It's not explicitly said don't tell the parent, hide this from the parent. Luckily we're not there yet, some school districts, but if that starts to happen, that should be the first thing the parent hears the day it happens, right? My child starts identifying as the opposite gender, right? That, to a common sense thinker, that's something that's very wrong with that child, because that isn't a natural thing. And again, that doesn't mean we should treat people that struggle with that unkindly, because gender dysphoria can be a real thing, right? But man alive, why are we shutting out parents or not bringing parents, their stakeholders, obviously, into those conversations? It's so pernicious and abusive. And I think the biggest reason I wanted to have you on, Jim, and I so appreciate you being willing to share your story and to talk about this, is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it's so unfortunate to hear that you've been memory holed by the Abbotsford School District and by the community here, because parents absolutely need to know this. There are so many things that I hear all the time because I'm asking these questions of people that parents would be horrified to hear, right? And they're just not being talked about. And you talk about the Abbotsford School District trying to protect their reputation. That never works. When you start shutting down conversation and debate, all that happens is evil, literally evil festers, right? And this stuff is just going to get worse, and kids are going to be more and more taken advantage of and indoctrinated by people who are just doing it out of their own narcissism and selfishness. And so I really appreciate your voice, and I hope you get to share with more people than just me.
Yeah, and I really love to, again, you can cut this out, but I think that kids that decide at a young age that they're not happy in their own body are kids who are not happy. And not just with their own body, that they're depressed and they've got issues. That's a pretty normal thing, and that's research-based.
Yeah.
I think kids in high school, even more so, struggle with depression. It's not a made-up statistic that it could be the leading cause of death for teenagers. People generally say second leading cause of death. But a lot of people would say first, because a lot of people, if they're dying, doing, drugs or car accident, it's really suicide.
Right.
They're taking I lost my nephew in Abbotsford, and to fentanyl.
Oh, jeez.
And it was depression based. Do you know one thing that would have really helped my nephew?
What's that?
People talking to him.
Yeah.
Talking him out of his depression. So when you say you shouldn't close down discussions, I'd say if you don't open up discussions, if you don't start talking to kids about all sorts of things, then you're not helping them. And you're in some ways abandoning them to their own thoughts and to some evil ideologies, to people on the net or people who want to get them as part of their team, whether it's an extremist religious group, whether it's, people who are, changing into this new gender or whatever it is. There's always groups out there that are going to prey on children. Mm-hmm. So we need to have open conversation with kids. We need to have open conversation with teachers, because the teachers are in the trenches with the kids. The people sitting at the top of the Abbotsford School District don't have a clue, for the most part, what's happening, what's in the schools, because people that they talk to are only going to, flatter them, lick their hand. The people, they go into school and they really start talking to teachers who are candid like me. They'd be doing a good thing for those kids. They don't want to do that because I don't think they're there for the kids. I think they're there for their careers. And that's not wrong. People do that in our society. People get ahead. People, look, I mentioned already, I have a sister who's got issues, because she went to Harvard, but she can't work. She's got a mental disorder, got borderline personality disorder. And I have another sister who's a judge. Well, everybody says nice things about my sister who's a judge, and everybody kind of goes, oh, what about how's your crazy sister? People are always judged on their career success or lack thereof. So I understand people wanting to get ahead. They'll do all sorts of things. As I said, I've said it in this discussion. They'll throw out the spellers to get rid of phonics. They'll break down the walls to have this open classroom concept, which is stupid as well. They'll do anything. If the people at the top of the system, the Minister of Education and the superintendents said, you know what, you'd be more effective as a teacher if you did it upside down, spitting nickels. You would have a lot of teachers looking around going, well, you know what? It might get me a better classroom, might get me a nice reference letter from my principal. So they'd get down. Yeah. You think there's any teacher in Abbotsford that's not wearing an orange shirt day? Right. The cost is too great. And the reward, some don't just wear orange shirts. Some will dye their hair red, orange and wear orange shoes. And my point is some people will take something like in any hysteria, any mass, sort of like Charles Manson type of mania. People will go to the
mass psychosis. Yeah.
That's the word. Thank you. Mass psychosis that will do and delusion, like with the graves. There's no graves, folks, that they're finding, and murdered children. So this is what's happening. It's really worrisome. But for me, people lose sight of the fact. They go, oh, Jim is conservative or Christian or anti-woke or he's old or he's what he's. Maybe I'm those things. Maybe I'm not. Really, you know what I really am? I'm a guy who cares about kids. Yeah. My nephew shouldn't have died. And a lot of kids who are suffering of depression and doing things, my own son had issues with that. And I'm not going to mention that. But they need help. They need us. They need adults. This world's not getting easier for young people. I think in many ways it's getting harder.
I'd say much harder, yeah.
Yeah. They need good common sense values. They need to learn from grandma and grandpa. They need to not dissociate themselves from Western civilizational, French Revolution, American Revolution values from the Enlightenment. They need to hold on to Enlightenment and academic and Christian and other good values that are out there. Because if they don't have them, they're going to struggle. And so I'm a guy one girl that reached out to me, her father's abandoned her, lives in I can't say anything more than that. The father's abandoned her. The mother has a new boyfriend. She has no love at home. She has no money at home. It was a kid that befriended me and would chat with me a little bit. And so when they walked me out of my school and they walked me out of my career, who's talking to her now? And I got help for her. I went to a counselor. I said, I need a female counselor to help me with this kid because I recognize I can't go beyond a certain, as a male, and I don't want to. But I was of value to her because I was there for her. So when they take me out, I'm tearful. They hurt kids. They didn't just hurt me. And you can show this. Don't hurt kids. Don't go into the profession of education if you're going to hurt kids. If you need to get rid of a teacher like me, then don't do it in front of them.
Yeah.
I just think the whole thing is absolutely cruel and sick. And in my case, they're taking out the teacher. You line up another teacher with me, and you've listened to me now for a little while. Do you think there's many teachers that know more than I do about residential schools or about history or about English literature in the Abbotsford School District, considering that I'm 64 and highly educated, more degrees than a thermometer? Do you really think that I'm so bad that I needed to be fired?
Yeah, not at all.
And they're hurting kids when they get rid of their teachers because kids create bonds with teachers. Mm-hmm. They don't give a darn about kids. That's what wokeism is. It's not good for society in any way. It's not going to create a richer society. It's going to create a poorer society. It's not going to create a more harmonious society. It's going to create a more divided society. It's not better by judging everybody on their basis of their race or gender or whatever orientation. It's much better when we just accept people for what they are and get along. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm speaking to the converted, but allow me to say those things.
No, absolutely, and I hope we can speak to the unconverted as well, because I think what this is going to take is first of all, you're absolutely right that I think the reason it sounds like your impassioned motivation for this is not wanting to see kids harmed. Right, and that's what I think. Especially conservative-leaning types are kind of bad at that. We're not great at sounding compassionate, even though a lot of our ideals are based in compassion. Right, is that is absolutely my motivation as well. Is that I was a volunteer youth leader, unpaid for 10 years, because I love the minds of teenagers, especially as who I was working with, are phenomenal, and there's so much hope. And they're so intelligent, and they're so much full of so much exuberance, and so fostering environments where children like that can thrive is a big part of why I talk about this and why I wanted to talk to you, because the stuff that's happening, cloaked in compassion and tolerance and acceptance and inclusivity, is absolutely harmful, and we see more and more of that. And like you look at the suicidal ideation in the trans community, or you look at the division around Indigenous issues in Canada, right? Where it's like we're not getting closer together. It's not getting easier to get along. If there's differences between those groups, and I'm one to think that a lot of those are contrived. Yeah, we come from different cultures and stuff, and I'm European, you're Indigenous, but most of those are made up, right? It's very easy to sit down across from someone who's different than you and have a great conversation. But when we keep harping on these issues and lying about them, right, what does that do but create more divisiveness, right, and create more toxicity, and it pigeonholes kids and it isolates them, and that's what creates real harm, is when they don't have a teacher with a slightly different opinion, and an accurate one actually, to go talk to about what they're going through. And especially the example being set for children is what? That adults can't sit down and have a conversation about differing opinions? I think this happened. No, I think this happened. Okay, let's go to the evidence and see who's closer to the truth, right? That they fired you and memory hold you, and that's their impulse rather than if they have nothing to hide, why are they? You know what I mean? Why are they hiding things? Right?
Because
they're in the right. Yeah.
Because they have to hide it. But and I've got to interrupt you there again. I'm not a rude person. It's just that you're saying too many intelligent things to lose. We have to stop whoever's watching us, even if it's one person. That I don't care. It's important because people are going to be watching this. That you talked about equity. They talk about, I call it diversity, inclusion, and equity. They're crossover. They're crossover words. They mean the opposite of what they say. There's no diversity, right? There's no inclusion of people like me. No diversity of thought. Let's go to equity. There's no equity. It's the opposite of equity, because the people who are coming in with the idea, like the top of the school board, they're paying themselves more all the time, right? They're not going around giving their money to homeless shelters in Abbotsford. So the whole thing is just a farce. It's a lie. Now, in 1984, there's a beautiful passage, as you know, where war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is truth. So what dictators do is, and we'll call them bad leaders because they're not dictators in school boards or school districts, but they're bad leaders when they do this. But it's a tendency. And it's a really worrisome thing in a world we live in today where more than half the people are living under dictatorship and authoritarian rule, where you can't think for yourself. And we don't want to recreate that in Canada unless we're as foolish as some people take us for being. And that is that what we need to do is we need to, and you've touched on these things, is we need to call them on their lies. And the first thing they do is they go after books. So in 2,000 years ago in China, where they buried the scholars and burned all their books, buried them alive. So they go after, Hitler went after the books, even Mickey Mouse. So they go after the books. In Abbotsford, I've given you examples, they went after the books. But more powerful than going after the books is they go after the past. Mm-hmm. And it's not just Orwell who figured this out, but he's the most important thinker in the area. But and all dictators do that. They recreate the past. And what Putin's doing there right now is he's saying the past. He's even saying right now Ukraine invaded Russia. And your viewers, regardless of your view on what's happening in Ukraine, listen to this point.
Right.
Ukraine did not invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. But Putin's now saying that Ukraine and the West invaded Russia. He's not even waiting years before he's altering history.
Wow.
So this is what they all do. And so what they do in Canada under benign Justin Trudeau, who comes across as a good guy, and I'm sure he's good in some ways, he's never committed a crime, but he's somebody who's manipulating people. Well, I think he's done bad things.
Convicted of a crime.
But what he's doing is he's manipulating you because he's got one goal, and that is to do with power and money and prestige. It's to do with Justin. It's not to do with you or kids in a school or people. So he looked at the past and go, what can I do to change the past to make me look better and to get me reelected? So he knew exactly what he was going to do. I'm going to paint all past prime ministers, because almost all of them were involved, because in residential schools, they went up to the 70s. The last one wasn't closed until 1996. Most of them were the 70s, but they went up fairly recently. And some who, like Chrétien in the 90s, was working in government as Indian Affairs guy in the 70s. So almost every previous prime minister in Canada was involved. So he smeared all of them. And all parliamentarians, conservatives, Green, NDP, all of them on October 27th of last year voted to call the Indian residential system a genocide. They all lined up behind Trudeau in this massive lie and distortion and revision of history. It wasn't. And I've shown a lot of pictures and I've given a lot of evidence to show that it was the best thing that happened to Indigenous people, because it was much better than the alternative, which was no food at home, nobody looking after them, no education, and no infirmary to help them dealing with their tuberculosis or whatever it was. So to me, it's just, this is not new. This is history just unfolding as it's always unfolded. People at the top are going to want to stay there. And they do the same thing all the time to stay there. And the thing that they're doing with me is they're in Abbotsford. They're changing the past because the administration in Abbotsford, they're all woke or pretending to be woke so they can show how much better they've made Abbotsford schools. They call their own schools world class. They say, we've got a world class system in Abbotsford. And it's all the same. We made them better. How we made them better? Because we've done more for certain minorities than those behind. Now, how do you do that? Well, you get them to do better. You get them to win more scholarships. But how do they win more scholarships? Well, you get other kids to win fewer scholarships. It doesn't work any other way. It's a zero-sum game. Yeah. If the Chinese kids are working hard and getting 95 and getting all the scholarships and the white kids are doing okay, that's not really good for the Indigenous kids and other kids. So we'll just completely change around the criteria, not just for scholarships, for university entrance or getting into law school or medical school. We'll just change the whole society for even becoming an administrator in Abbotsford. Will make it much easier if you're not of certain groups. But you're not making it better. What you're doing actually is you're promoting people who are less capable than others. So what you're doing though is you're saying, look at in Abbotsford, they're going, the number one thing is we have done more than any other school district in Canada to indigenize, to promote Indigenous education, to promote Indigenous kids. So the kids all sit in one room through the day and they chat. I don't know what they do have academic value, frankly. And they all pass. And there's no marking anyway, so it doesn't matter. And they all go on to things. And then they get the scholarships because they're Indigenous. But have we really helped them? And certainly we haven't helped the rest of the kids, not only by not being able to compete fairly, but we're abusing history. And that's totalitarian. So if you look at my Twitter again and you look at the description of me, I describe myself as a quiet teacher, recently a quiet teacher, now an activist fighting woke totalitarianism in schools. Mm-hmm. Because it's totalitarian. It's people at the top controlling. Yeah. So what's wrong with me? All I did was say they died from disease. That they didn't. I didn't say any of these other things I'm saying to you today. I believe them. Yeah. Most teachers at my school believe them. We talk quietly about them. They weren't disagreeing with me. But you don't say them.
Yeah. And you know what, Jim? I think the craziest thing too is you and I could be totally wrong about all of this, right? Let's say that. I'm willing to say, like, you know what I mean? I'm not a history teacher myself. I definitely trust your word on it a lot more than I would ever trust mine. But like, you could be wrong about everything. I could be wrong about everything. I would welcome the opportunity to be proven wrong on all of this. And I think that's the biggest indicator to me that people that think like we do are on the right side of this, because only one side is going, this is what I think, but if I'm wrong, show me, right? If 215 kids died at the Kamloops Residential School, that's horrific. I want to know about that, right? And we need to be taught about it so it never happens again. But if that's not true, all that's doing is fostering division, and it's a divide and conquer thing from Justin Trudeau, whatever it is. It's like, if they're busy fighting each other, they're not fighting me. How do I come out of this situation with a little red cape on my back and looking like the hero, right? And so it's troubling to hear only one side going, if I'm wrong, show me. I'm open to the discussion. And then the other side's just memory holding people, shutting down discussion, firing teachers who have dissident, read true opinions. Right? It's not good to hear. And so I think the biggest thing I want people to take away from this and from your story is we need to wake up to this kind of stuff happening at home, right? This is no longer conservative Abbotsford, Bible Belt Abbotsford. Our schools are not inoculated from this woke mind virus, right? It's home. It's here already. And I think parents need to be exposed to this. Parents need to be sharing stuff like this. Because if this just gets swept under the rug, it only gets worse, right? Evil is only allowed to succeed when good men do nothing. I think I screwed up that quote, but that's the gist. Is that we need to start speaking up and sharing that the stuff is going on. And I'm sorry for what happened to you, but in the sense that I think your decision to speak up, I hope, is a catalyst in Abbotsford. And so I think a lot of good can come out of teachers like yourself speaking out about this kind of stuff going on, because we're very much a city that likes to just kind of close our eyes. Nah, it's not happening here. We're fine. And it's just not the case. And it hasn't been the case for a while. I remember I graduated in 2010. I remember back then looking at the scholarships I was available, or I was able to get, right? And go, can't apply for that one, can't apply for that one, can't apply for that one. Because they were identity based back then, right? And straight white male, like not getting any of those. And that's not like a boo-hoo me. Like that's just, I've always been just take what I can get, and adversity is welcome. And so I need to fight through this. I'm not going to cry about it. But if the school district is going to do that, right, and then pat themselves on the back for, oh, we're making a difference, right, and we're look at how well we've done by you're absolutely right, taking the meritocracy out of it, and you look at, I mean, to use in a kind of a similar example, affirmative action in the States, right? And are you familiar with Thomas Sowell, the economist? He's a brilliant voice on this, but he talks about what affirmative action has done. And so affirmative action is, you just need a lower SAT score if you're black than if you're white, and then you get into higher colleges. But you look at the dropout rates of African Americans who got into better colleges than they were actually equipped for, right? And they drop out at much higher rates, and then they don't get the education at all. Whereas if they had just gone to like a slightly less caliber of a school based on their actual grades, they would have graduated, they would have gotten the degree, they would have gotten the job, right? And so by patting ourselves on the back as good little social justice warriors that like lowered the standards for this particular group, you end up doing more harm to that group. Well done. Like, you don't actually do real good when you're obsessed with the virtue signaling, when you're obsessed with your own virtue.
Yeah, and they call that the new bigotry of low expectations. You're not only hurting the white kids and the Chinese kids or the Indian kids from India or whatever that are achieving at a higher level at a school in Abbotsford, but you're hurting the kids that are getting in without working hard, without getting a good education. Right. How are they going to be better as parents one day? How are they going to be good citizens? If they're, anyhow, it's wrong, but I just want to, you don't want to, there's something else you said there. I've been around the block as an educator and as a student in schools. Never in my life until maybe 10 years ago did I hear anything anti-Christian being said in schools. Never. I never was. It was the opposite. I remember when I was a kid in school, we used to say the Lord's Prayer in public schools. My first year in kindergarten, we sang the God Save the King. It was God Save the Queen. God Save the Queen. She came in 57 But so my point is, it was never anti-Canada or British, or it was never anti-Christian. And then about 10 years ago in Surrey, they started coming with anti-Christian stuff, because that's part of the woke stuff. Christians are oppressive and privileged and all that kind of stuff. I won't go on there. Then I go to Abbotsford 4 years ago. And then this happens in 2 years ago, it happens in Kamloops. And I'm going, oh my gosh. Kids are coming up to me, white kids in the hallway. They're coming up to me or outside my portable and saying, why am I only hearing bad things about Christians? That's what they say. That Christians are murderers. The Christian teachers murdered all these kids. The Christians abused all these kids, in all the schools. That Christians, killed the Indian in their culture. They destroyed their culture, took all their land, stole their land. Every day in Abbotsford, they have land acknowledgements to say that we not only were terrible to them in the past, but we're still terrible to them. My point that this is a good one to end on. Abbotsford doesn't understand itself. It doesn't understand itself right now because it is a Christian community in part, maybe large part, but it's part of its core, its fiber. And they're beautiful people. They have Mennonites that escaped, 400 years ago because of Catherine the Great in Russia. They made their way over such long times and, tribulations and trials to get here. They're great people. We shouldn't use schools to debase Christians. And just so here's the final note for me, because unless you have more for me, and I'm happy to go on. You've been amazing. If the Christian teachers, not only in Kamloops, but in other schools, murdered their own children, then you need to deal with that. And they need to be punished like anybody else.
Yeah.
But if it's false testimony, if it's not true, then you can't do it.
Yeah.
It's against the law. So what senior management, the trustees, because they're allowing this to happen, the government in British Columbia, the government federally, all these people, in my view, are committing a crime.
Yeah.
And my only crime, but it's just putative, it's not real, was that I told the truth.
Yeah.
And I only did it after reading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. What I said was right of the report.
Wow.
It's disease. They don't say murder. They say disease in the Truth and Reconciliation. So there's nothing. So it's incredible.
Yeah.
So what you're doing by taking an interest in me, which you've done, and you've strengthened me. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but every day in school, I kind of come away a little bit with a sense of, I have learned a little something, from a kid or a colleague or just from my own failure at doing something. But I've learned something. From this. And one of the things I've learned, because you seem so astute and you're thinking, and to think that you're only 30 is amazing, that I've got to be stronger. I've allowed myself, I'm on Twitter and all that sort of stuff, but I need to be stronger, and I am stronger still. And what I mean by that is I need to, part of me is going, move on with my life. Because I'm not being paid for one.
No doubt. Yeah.
But another part of me is saying, but I have a message that's important.
Yeah. And
maybe I need to, I didn't expect to be under the lights, but I am, to, small lights, I'm just a small person, but people are listening to me in some circles, that maybe I should run with this for a little while longer. And that part of me is bigger than it was before I talked to you today. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And I think Jim, I usually ask if you have like a final closing message. I think that was great. And that was really eloquently put. But I would take what you just said and apply it to everyone. I think we need more strength from everyone. That's kind of what I hope to accomplish by talking to you and to talking to people that think like you, is that there's so much fear, right? There's so much, I want to do better in my career, right? I want to get the job. I want to get the promotion. I want to look like an upstanding ally of a person. And I think breaking through that fear is how we get past that. Because Jim, there's only one of you. How many teachers are there in Abbotsford? And you're thousands. And you're the only one I've heard of, like, speaking out against this kind of stuff. That's troubling. And so I think because right now the social cost of speaking up is too high, and the way that changes is pressure from parents specifically. I think the parent group is, I think, the biggest one that needs to wake up to this. Is it's going to take parents in Abbotsford getting up in arms, not literally, but like getting up in arms about what's going on, and putting pressure on the school district, on schools, on teachers, to stop lying to their children, to stop promoting harmful things and gender ideology and historical fallacies, right? The social cost needs to swing the other way, right? It needs to go where a teacher is more afraid to promote gender ideology than they are to not go along with it, right? Because right now, the left has done a really good job of making the social cost really high to speak out against that. And it needs to swing back the other way. And it's going to take parents waking up to this stuff and applying pressure to school districts and to teachers and to schools. Because I think a lot of teachers, like you said, don't agree with this stuff, right? But if I don't show up to school without my orange shirt on tomorrow, or the little pride flag on my wall in my classroom, I'm going to hear about it, right? I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be a social outcast, right? And we need to create an environment where that is no longer the case, where the social cost swings the other way, because it's completely backwards right now at the cost of children, which is horrific. And I super appreciate you being loud. I know like I've had experiences with, I don't know, cancellation or cancel culture or whatever, and you get a reputation as a loudmouth or obnoxious, or why don't you just go away and, you know, just go crawl away into the forest and die. and I want to encourage you, don't do it. Don't do it. We need louder people. And if the worst people call you is obnoxious, that's great, because I'm sure you have been called much worse things as have I. But I super appreciate you being loud and you sharing your story, because I think it's one that can be used as a catalyst to show people what's going on in this community.
But I want this emotion to come across to you in ending. In Canada, a teacher shouldn't be fired and lose his livelihood, even if he's wrong in a classroom. We have a right to free conscience, to free expression. If I'm sincerely trying to teach history and I'm wrong, but in this case, they took away my ability to support my family for telling the truth. So I think people in Abbotsford should be more than concerned. And I think they should know about my case. So thank you for helping to spread the case. And the people in Abbotsford should ask themselves again, why it is that this is that why is it that I'm being made to disappear? Who cares about me? It's not about me. It's about the fact that you're destroying a teacher because they've ruined me. I'm never going to teach again. On that basis, walked out in front of my students on that basis. Like, it's just not something that people should just allow to happen in their own community.
Yeah. No,
it doesn't matter what it was. Yeah. If I was wrong, if I said, look, there were 10,000 kids that were machine gunned by their teachers, or I don't know, I said something, I don't know what it is. But if I was doing it wrong, but doing it with the intention of getting it right, which teachers do, then they should still have said, oh, that's fine. Well, Jim, did you not read this? Oh, okay, sorry. Kids, I've got it wrong.
Yeah.
But it's not that. It's just we're one step closer toward a totalitarian society.
Yeah. No, when you start shutting down conversation, you absolutely are. Because the response, and again, any rational adult knows this. When someone says something you disagree with, talk to them about it. Have a conversation. The school's response, rather than perp walking you in front of your students, should have been, you know what? First of all, let's maybe have a private conversation. Why do you think this? What's your evidence for this? Right? Maybe amongst teachers or whatever. But maybe having a debate at the school. What a great way to teach people how truth wins is have two people who disagree on something, have a public debate about it, and let intelligent students decide for themselves who's providing better evidence. Right? That's like debate and discussion is one of the foundations of our democracy. And to hear that a school district is just responding by perp walking the teacher who they disagree with, rather than having a conversation, what a concept is troubling. It's really and I hope to, like I said, I've reached out to trustees. I hope to get the reasons why this happened. I hope to get to the bottom of it, because I never want to see it happen again. And so, yeah, again, thank you for sharing your story. So maybe let's leave it on this, because we've gone, I think, almost like 3 hours here. So I appreciate you taking so much of your time. It's been excellent talking with you.
Well, this isn't part of the thing, but if I have said anything that's historically wrong, or in any way wrong, in anything whatsoever, can I say the same thing back to you? Come back to me.
Yeah.
Because that would help me. So if I've said anything wrong, then it would make me stronger, because I wouldn't want to repeat something that's wrong. And if I'm not sure about something like the name of the school, I said that to you. I think this is the name of the middle school. My point is, I never say this is unless I know I'm right.
Right.
But I am right.
Yeah, but I am right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm right.
I'm not wrong.
I'm right into this. You can't call it probable or potential graves.
Yeah.
You can't say it's probable there's an alien and it's sitting under me right now or pinching my bum, unless there's proof that potentially there is. Right. But my it's just so silly to call them potential graves. The whole country is calling them now. They've gone from, mass murdered children, secret burials. The next thing, you might even see my little tweet on it, to probable, and then to potential, and then to, but nothing's been found. But And it just goes on and on. And now the next step is they're pretending they're not talking about it anymore. So it just goes away. So the trustees are likely going to not answer you, right? Or they're going to try and make it go away, just disappear the whole subject,
right?
Because they're foolish. They're looking foolish in this,
right.
And so this is it's just absolutely crazy about this whole thing, is I'm right until I'm wrong, and if it wasn't disease, but of course the whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission said it was disease.
Right.
So, but if they come back tomorrow and say we were wrong in our 5.5 years of investigation and said it was murder the whole way through, then I'll change.
Yeah, exactly.
But right now, I have what you do to make any sense as an adult is you make an argument by taking facts and building them and constructing them, and you create your position, your whatever, and that's it.
Yeah.
The other side has nothing. And they threw in some stuff that was just, I won't go into it, but if you were interested sometime, but they're not, because they knew they had nothing. And then in the end, they came back to the same thing. So it is the two things. And again, it's what I said that day, but they're not saying it was about disease. They've changed it. I've got it written that it was saying that I said disease and I didn't say it was a natural murder. They changed it and said that I was inappropriate in what I said because the kid objected. Well, she objected because you made her into believe something that was erroneous, fallacious. Right. And the second thing is they're getting after me, firing me now because they didn't think that was enough because I'm talking to the media. I'm talking to someone like you. Is that not a good thing for a free society? For people to be able to have a conversation with journalists? You call yourself a writer, podcaster? Right. And it wasn't you that I was talking to. It was, but Rebel News. And it was a Black woman who's part Indigenous.
Right. That's Drea Humphrey, right?
Yeah. How is talking to Drea a crime? But they're, you did this and you did that. No, I didn't do anything wrong. Gee. She reached out to me. So they're going to lose their case, but because they have all the power, I might be dead before that happens, or I might, but that's the game they play, right? Right. It's been 4 years. Yeah. I haven't taught for 2 years. It's been 4 years, and it's going to be, I was told by my union, that it could be another 2 years or more. That's just the arbitration. And then I go to court.
Right.
So it's going to take possibly the rest of my life.
Gee, long enough for the story to go away, for sure.
That's what I'm saying. Sure. Yeah. Long enough for them never to be accountable. Yeah. So that's why I'm likely going to continue to do what I'm doing. And you've helped me in this, made me a little stronger today. That I'm going to stay a little bit longer on Twitter, but I'm going to go back to what I was doing a couple of months ago. I'm going to start writing again.
Right on.
And right on. Writing because I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. That's a 70s movie network.
Yeah. No, I love it. So
when's that going to happen in Abbotsford? When's that going to happen in Abbotsford? Why are people in Abbotsford? This is between the two of us. I'm sticking with the question. You're a really smart guy and you're comfortable and confident. There's nothing that I'm saying to you right now that's offending you. I know that. So I'm going to be tough with you. And I'm going to ask you this one question. Yeah. When is your community? It's not my community. I live in Surrey. Right. If this was Surrey, I'd be at Municipal Hall. I'd be telling those people in no uncertain terms, what the hell are you doing? When are people in Abbotsford? You're doing your part. Well, you're interviewing me, for example. You're doing a great job. But when are the people in your family? When is your friend group? When are the people that you went to school with? When are they going to start saying they should actually care about this? Well, yeah, you said adults agree. So why are they allowing this to happen?
Yeah.
Perp walk, who cares about me? It's talking about cunnilingus. That's in Soji. They have pictures of women performing cunnilingus and guys having anal sex. Look at Soji age 1, 2, 3. They have pictures. So I'm emotional because I'm able to not think about being fired, not think about not having any income. Not, as I said to you, I'm okay with that because I'm I'm comfortable enough because the stage of life I'm in, but it's still not the same. I'm making adjustments, but I go through my day not talking about this. And I get this nice man from Abbotsford who's interested in me. That doesn't happen every day. Drea was interested in me. Some big names, Barbara Kay and Conrad Black, the National Post. There have been people interested in me. Laura Southern and others saying there have been people who have interested in me. But most people aren't interested in me. So most days I don't talk about it. So I don't get emotional.
Right. No, honestly, and I appreciate that. All it shows is that you're clearly passionate about what you're talking about, and I think doing this for good reasons. And yeah, I guess like for myself, the reason it hits close to home was because it is close to home, right? A lot of times, especially like I took a bit of a break from podcasting and stuff, just with my daughter on the way and now here. But the reason I'm getting back into it and I'm kind of adjusting my focus is to localize it. Because I used to talk a lot. I'm fascinated with American politics because they're kind of just more interesting generally, a little more dramatic. But I realized it's like this stuff is happening close to home, right? I was one of those Abbotsford residents just going like, nah, this stuff doesn't happen in Abbotsford. You know, it's all this stuff happening in the States or whatever, right? And we need the scales to fall from our eyes in this city because it is happening here. And so your story, when I saw it, I followed Dre on Twitter. I think that's where I first was exposed to your story. I was like, I lived across the street from Mowat for the majority of my childhood, right? So I'm like, that's a school just down the road from where I live, or used to be, and for us to just have our eyes closed to this, I guess not enough people from Abbotsford are on Twitter. Maybe that's the problem, but but this stuff is happening close to home, and we need to wake up to it. And people are being harmed by it, and so I think, like I said, I hope you're a catalyst, and your story is a catalyst for some real change. Because I feel the same about our community. We need to start doing something about it, right? We have to stop being so passive.
If I can be any help, if you ever needed me for any reason down the road, let me know. And a good person to talk to would be Chris. Oh my gosh, Billboard Chris.
Billboard Chris, yeah.
No, I'm talking about an interesting guy to interview.
Yeah.
And
I would love to. Yeah.
And then
I've interacted with him a few times on Twitter, and he's doing
phenomenal
work. Yeah.
And so if you, I can give you more suggestions of people. There's a teacher in Ontario who's amazing, a lesbian teacher, and I say that because she's part of the community. Right. And she was, she's got something like 15,000 followers, and she's changing the world. But she's also got a progressive disease and can't, like it's really. They walked her out of teaching. And now, even though she's young, she's 29 or something, she can't teach anymore because of her progressive disease. Right. It's so cruel what they do.
Yeah.
You don't fire people unless you've got really good cause.
Yeah.
And because you really...
Like you said, if someone's touching kids and they get a month suspension, but you get walked out for having a dissident opinion that is also an accurate opinion.
Yeah, like, and going to the media here in a democracy. Yeah. Gee, imagine that, talking to somebody. They say that to you the moment, this is the thing that bothers them the most. The moment you get investigated in Abbotsford and a lot of school boards, you can't talk to anybody. And then the union comes in and says, you can't talk to anybody, but you're a union person. And I said to them, and I swear right now, but I don't want to offend anybody, but I said essentially, I probably swore to them. And I said to them, there's no effing way that I'm not going to talk to my wife, my kids, my neighbor, my doctor, my whatever, my lawyer, my point is, what are you saying? Oh, well, no, those people are okay. You just can't talk to anyone else. You can't talk to kids and teachers. And then you realize that they want you to completely make you disappear. And that's what they've done. So I'm going to not disappear. I've taken too much of your time, Patrick. But look, man, it's been fantastic. But I'm here. I might be of you've helped me. But I might be of help in giving you suggestions, people to interview. So don't lose my phone number, or you can get me on Twitter. I'll probably still on Twitter.
For sure. So where can people find you? Just to
if you put something, are you going to put something out likely then?
You can send me the links afterwards. But
but I don't even know. I'm Jim McMurtry on Twitter. I think it's Jim McMurtry01 is my handle.
Okay.
But you can find that just by going on Twitter. You found that, right? I think Twitter is a great thing. But if you ever have somebody that wants my phone number, I'd be happy to have my phone number out there.
Right.
Meaning that, I'm not doing anything to hurt any people. I'm not naming names and saying bad things. I don't expect someone at my door type thing. I'd be happy to have my phone number put out. Right. And I sent it to you this afternoon. So, but the Twitter feed would be number one, because then I could quickly move people to show them other stuff as well. Or they can look at my profile. What a great thing.
Totally.
Because I spent 2 months just building up my profile to my tweets. So one tweet doesn't really say much, or they might disagree with it. But if they say all of them, then they understand that I'm not an unreasonable person.
Totally. Yeah, so Jim McMurtry 01 on Twitter. And we'll keep an eye out. Yeah, when you start writing, I'd love to hear about that. So
and I have lots of stuff that are online. Last week in the Dorchester Review or whatever. So if you put my name on Google, you can find articles by me. But none of that's important. What's important to me is this, is understanding or doing something about the fact that nobody in Abbotsford knows about me, pretty much. And the Abbotsford News is bearing the story. Abbey News.
Yeah.
What is it? Can I say a word I didn't want to say in the thing? I want to use the word sheep.
Yeah.
It's an ugly metaphor, and I didn't want people in Abbotsford. I didn't want to say that online. But that's what it is. Right. I get teachers being sheep because we get punished subtly and overtly. If the principal doesn't like what you're saying, then you're in trouble one way or another. But it might be something really small, like you don't get a promotion. Or a nice classroom, as they said. But why are ordinary parents? Why aren't they just going in and going, what the hell? I don't want that flag. The flag doesn't have white people in it. Doesn't have Chinese people in it.
Right. The new updated trans.
No, it's not trans. It's the
BIPOC and.
But none of those flags have white people or Chinese people, or they might, because Chinese people aren't brown. They just have brown and black people. Like, I'm going, how can you be exclusive of half the population of your school, or in Abbotsford, more than half the population? I demand, get that darn flag down. But it's in every school, at every sidewalk at schools, and everyone's out there gleefully painting this stuff as though they're making the world a better place. And I'm going, my kid's not on that. Right. Do you know, one last thing, and I'm talking too much, Patrick, but I'm not wasting your time, because I think you see I'm a bit of a repository, because I'm not a stupid guy, but also I spend a lot of time with a lot of smart, educated people on the topic. So I am part of that research group. Again, it's full of the leading people in the country looking into the issue, and who are also courageous, because there are other talented people who are just hiding. But it's my grandson is in grade 5, so he's going to school, kindergarten. And on Easter, he was sitting in our living room, and he said, his mom asked him, he said, what do you like about Easter? Because it's Easter. Do you know it's Easter? Right? She was explaining the chocolate hunt and all that kind of stuff. And it was Sunday or Friday. Anyhow. And he said, oh, yeah, I don't know about Easter, but I know about Ramadan. And he said he likes that. And what do you know about Ramadan? Oh, our teacher told us yesterday about Ramadan. And it's, you don't eat for 7 hours, but it sounded fun. I'm trying to remember how he said it as a little kid. And I said, what do you know about Easter? And he said, I don't know about Easter. Wow. So here you have, the day before Easter, a kid in a school being told about Ramadan, where they starve kids and dehydrate them for the daylight hours. Like, it's not right, in my view. And I'm going to, I'm strong enough to say to anyone, it's not right to do that to kids. But but they'll be saying in Abbotsford schools, they did that at my school. They were circulating all sorts of staff messages during Ramadan: don't eat in front of kids, don't do this. Like, they're just bending over backwards to have these kids not eat or drink all day long, and not talking about Easter.
Right.
And Abbotsford too. Easter, was.
Yeah.
It's captured. It's ideologically captured. It's absolute insanity. They're teaching in
That's a
history.
great way to
You
say
don't
it.
teach
Yeah.
about Canada anymore. And if you do
Yeah.
teach about Canada, you only talk about all the racist thing. Homogata
Yeah.
Maru, the St. Louis, Chinese head tax, Indian residential schools. Goes on and on and on. Japanese internment. Uh, that's Canadian history. It wasn't when I was a kid.
Right.
It was great
Yeah.
stuff. And it was a lot of Indigenous stuff too. But it was great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to
That's
go.
the thing is we talk a lot about all the negatives, right? And you know what? To the extent that the negatives are true, we should talk about them, right? Because you avoid repeating it by talking about it.
But that's part of it. That's what makes it interesting. Talk about the whole thing, the whole picture.
Exactly. Yes. To avoid the positives, now you're spinning a narrative, right?
But as a teacher, I'm not. I'm trying to be interesting. So I will like to talk about war as opposed to talking about a document. Like, oh, great, that's really exciting to kids. But more important for me is that what I say in the little bit of time that I just talk about something, that I give an accurate picture. Mm-hmm. So if I'm talking about Easter, it's not all going to be good because there was a person, on a cross, but it's not going to be all bad. It's not going to be all anything. And if anything, it's going to be inspirational and it's going to be respectful, because you don't want kids in a school to be negative and disrespectful. Those are words that you've used.
Yeah.
That's how you teach. So I'm not just talking about Indigenous. Guess who my closest friend is? Part Indigenous.
Right.
I'm not making that up.
Yeah. No, I believe you.
Yeah. And he's Métis.
Yeah.
But he's part Indigenous. Mm-hmm. And this idea, now everyone thinks I'm this terrible racist.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, no, actually, I care about Indigenous people. They don't want their history. They want to know about their history too. This isn't about Indigenous people. They're just being used.
Yeah. Avoiding the truth does nobody any good.
Yeah.
And so I think, terms like the racist or the homophobe or the transphobe or the Islamophobe, they're all just things they call you when they can't talk to you anymore. So, Jim, it's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you.
My wife's calling me away. I'm this.
All good. That's okay. That's like we've been.
No, she feels sorry for you.
Oh no!
Anyone having to listen to me,
you, Jim. I've reached out to you, and I've absolutely enjoyed talking to you. And thank you for spending so much time with me today.
It's been a great pleasure, and I wish you the best. And again, I'm a helpful guy. So if I can help you with giving you a good guest in the future, let me know, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely reach out to you, and I hope to have you back on sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, buddy. Take care, Patrick.
There we go. That was Jim McMurtry, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. Share this one as much as you can, because like I said, parents need to be made aware of this stuff. There's so much here in Abbotsford that parents are completely unaware of, and I think would be horrified to learn if they were made aware of it. So not only is it reflective of what's going on in school districts across Canada and across the States, so it's a universal story in a lot of ways, but specifically here in Abbotsford, this is not what we want our kids exposed to, right? And like I said, as a parent now myself, I wouldn't want my little girl to be exposed to some of the stuff that's going on. I know there are thousands of parents in Abbotsford that don't want the same. So spread the word. There'd be a lot more of us fighting this fight, I think, if we actually just had a clue what was being taught in our schools and how harmful it is. Because this, like Jim and I talked about, this isn't about bigotry or transphobia or homophobia or whatever other phobia you want to throw at us. It's about harming kids. It's about not wanting to see kids poisoned with an ideology that has nothing to do with tolerance or inclusion or diversity or equity. It's just communism at its roots. It's Marxism. It's communism. It's about turning kids against their own families, so they get brainwashed into good little communist activists. And it's a story we've seen repeated so many times, especially through the 20th century. And we need to be aware that it's happening in the Bible Belt. It's happening in little conservative Abbotsford. And so I'm very happy to be back. I'll be doing a lot more writing, hopefully podcasting, getting back into this, because this is stuff I can't just close my eyes to. I can't just shut off and not speak up about this stuff, because I think it's doing real harm. And so I hope to have you join me in the fight. and you can do that really easily just by like doing all the regular. I'm sure you're sick of hearing it. Like, subscribe, comment, 5-star reviews, all that stuff. Subscribe on the Substack, and thank you to the paid subscribers already there. I super appreciate you, and you guys help out with me making this content and doing more writing and more podcasting. So much love. So good to be back. Hope to see you more frequently, and I love you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Have an excellent day and an excellent week, and God bless. Cheers. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this week's Hemlock podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends and family. Tell them to subscribe, because if you loved it, then they're going to love it too, obviously. Also, head on over to iTunes to leave us a 5-star rating and review. That helps us a lot with the charts. And if you're not going to leave us 5 stars, then forget about it. Don't worry about it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Love you so much for listening. Let's continue to ride out this increasingly insane world with irreverence and joy. This is your host, Patrick Joliker, and much love, y'all. Peace.